The Rockstar's Wedding. Book 6 in the Romance Island Resort series. Written by Demelza Carlton. Autonarrated by AI Chris from Google. 34. Roofs repaired, check. Windows fixed, check. Damaged storm shutters replaced, check. Lagoon no longer looked like a Palm Sunday parade, check. Villa Maxima completely refurbished, check. Everything that could be cleaned or repaired had been, so why did Zan feel so nervous, waiting for Angel to arrive? She'd spent so much time with Jason lately, checking everything twice, that she automatically used his name for the girl. When the helicopter landed, Zan was pleased to find that the hulking security specialist hadn't come along this time, but Angel wasn't alone. She introduced her companion as Liv, her photographer, who had come along to advise on possible spots for the ceremony, the reception, and photographs throughout the day. "But aren't you doing it all in the function rooms?" Zan blurted out. "Only if it rains, which you've already told me it doesn't during the dry season," Angel said. "I want to do things outside as much as possible. I don't like being confined. I want a beach ceremony, and the reception somewhere by the water too. I want to be able to see the stars when we dance our bridal waltz, so we must have an outdoor dance floor. We don't have anywhere like that. This is the Kimberley, where it gets hot, so all our public areas are shaded. You can't put a dance floor out in the blazing sun, you'll roast your guests." Angel smiled thinly. "Dancing is for after dark, of course, just like the rest of the wedding reception. Perhaps you could remove the roof from one of your existing public areas?" She just spent the last month putting roofs back on buildings. Didn't the girl understand? Angel continued as if she hadn't expected a response. "I'm still not certain that would be enough. Nothing you have is close enough to the water. What I really need is a large expanse of decking, extended across the lagoon." Build in the lagoon? The wildlife on the reef had barely recovered from the cyclone and its hungry shark visitor. Sinking concrete pylons into the water would cause immeasurable damage to what was a unique and quite delicate ecosystem. "You can't," Zan said firmly. "The island is a nature reserve, and building a structure like that in our protected lagoon would never get approval. Even if it would, you'd never get a response from the Shire Planning Office in time." Thunderclouds lurked in Angel's eyes. "Call Jason. We'll see what he says." Zan used her wristband to send an urgent page for Jason, who appeared promptly less than 5 minutes later. Probably lurking, listening in on their conversation, Zan thought. Angel repeated her proposal for Jason's benefit, then folded her arms across her chest, waiting for his response. I guess we could," he said, looking from Angel to Zan and back again. "Do you think we could get one of the construction crews back in time to build it before the wedding?" Jason probably could, but Zan might have to wait until April. Still, constructing decking couldn't take much longer than removing and replacing a cyclone-warped roof, and that hadn't taken more than a week. "It's not about the construction, it's about the lagoon life," Zan explained. "There are fish species in our lagoon found nowhere else in the world except here. The resort has a responsibility to protect them, not build a bloody great big platform over the top of them. It wouldn't be across the whole lagoon, right? Just a small bit of it in the shallows. If we picked a spot where there aren't any fish, we wouldn't hurt any of them. Maybe." Jason babbled on, looking increasingly desperate. He couldn't refuse Angel, Zan realized. The longer she held out, the more miserable he became. And if it came down to it, Joe would probably weigh in on Angel's side too. None of them knew how amazing the lagoon was. None of them had ever been under the surface, to see the life teeming in the reefs, the natural aquarium just begging to steal your attention for hours at a time. There was just so much to see. "You need to see it," Zan blurted out, interrupting Jason. "You need to dive in the lagoon to understand what I mean when I say it's unique." "Absolutely not," Angel said. "I've never been scuba diving before and I don't have the gear," Jason said. Zan didn't let up. "Snorkeling then. We have plenty of masks and snorkels here for the tours we run in the dry season. I'll personally take you on a snorkeling tour of the lagoon, so you see what you'll put at risk by disturbing the seafloor." Angel waved dismissively at Jason. Take him. I didn't bring any swimwear. And while you're in the water, find a spot where I can have my deck. The whole lagoon can't be precious coral reef. I know for a fact that part of it gets dredged out to keep it from silting up entirely. If that isn't disturbing the seafloor, I don't know what is. She headed in the direction of the pub. I'll be sitting somewhere cool. With a drink. Zahn waited for the girl to disappear from sight before she grinned at Jason. Ready for that snorkeling tour I promised you? If it keeps me away from her for a couple of hours, then fuck yes, Jason breathed. You know we're going to have to do what she says anyway, right? It'll cost a fortune, Zahn replied. Jason shrugged. Tell her that. I don't think she'll care. It's her wedding and she can afford it. Fuck, she could buy my share in the resort if she wanted and still have money to burn on her precious deck. I'm not sure I'd want to stay on as manager if she took over as the owner, Zahn said. You mean you like me better? Jason asked eagerly. Zahn snorted. I wouldn't go that far. She sighed. You better go get changed into your swim gear. I'm only taking you on this tour for as long as you keep your pants on. I'll meet you back here in 15 minutes. Yes, ma'am. Jason sketched a salute, then strode off down the path to his villa, whistling. 35. True to his word, Jason returned wearing a pair of board shorts. Zahn felt unusually self-conscious in her bikini. The memory of Vanessa Fisher was still clear in her mind, and Zahn came up short when compared to the goddess of love. Not that she was after love here, Zahn told herself. She wanted to share her love of the reef with Jason, that's all. Better that his eyes were on the fish and not her boobs anyway. On the shore, his gaze was fixed on her face. His whole face lit up like a kid at Christmas when she held out his mask. She explained what to do if his mask or snorkel filled with water, as she would for any novice, and Jason nodded gravely. For once, he seemed happy to do as he was told. Together, they knelt in the shallows, letting him get accustomed to breathing through the snorkel. He let out a shout and pointed at something, raising his head so the top of his snorkel dipped below the surface. While he spluttered, the turtle that had attracted his attention paddled into deeper water, out of sight. There would be more, Zahn knew, but she thumped Jason on the back and waited for him to recover so they could set off after the turtle. High tide was an hour away, so the lagoon was still as a millpond, ruffled by the slight breeze but otherwise calm. The perfect time for a beginning snorkel. Zahn had considered bringing fins, but with no current to speak of, she'd decided against it. Jason was a confident swimmer. The mask and snorkel were enough to get used to on this first trip. Another time, if they spent some time on the southern reefs, when the tide was on the way out, they could try a more strenuous swim with fins. Observing Jason's progress now, she knew she'd made the right decision. He shouted and pointed to something else, dunking his head under the water again. This time he trod water while he cleared his snorkel, looking to Zahn for what to do next. If you see something you want to share, just pat my arm and point. Most creatures don't like a lot of noise. It scares them away. And you'll see more if you're not splashing around with your snorkel on the surface all the time, she said gently. Jason nodded. Shall we go? Zahn pointed in the direction of the first coral bombi, home to anemones and their resident striped anemone fish. Jason set off slowly, assuming the same leisurely pace he'd used while swimming naked past her window this morning. Zahn kept pace with him this time, unlike this morning, when only her eyes had followed him. It had been envy and longing she'd felt. Not for him. Of course not. She'd wanted to swim, but known she wouldn't have time for that luxury until after Angel's visit. That made this swim an added bonus, hours earlier than expected. Zahn glimpsed a flipper on the far side of the coral, Jason's elusive turtle perhaps. She tapped his shoulder, pointing the way, and found him following her lead. Rounding the bombi, a tumbled mass of calcified coral that stretched several meters from the sea floor almost to the surface, Zahn waited for Jason to see her favorite coral garden. He gurgled something and pointed, but his eyes widened further behind his mask as he saw more and more. Anemones drifted lazily as striped black and white fish wove between the hydra-like fronds. A couple of bright blue parrotfish rasped their rosy beaks across the hard coral, dislodging sand in their search for food. A small green turtle, perhaps the size of a dinner plate with flippers, floating above the bombi, like the strangest angel she'd ever seen on a Christmas tree. Zaan glimpsed movement in the shadows of a crevice in the side of the coral, but she was too slow to see if it was a fish or an eel. Or maybe even a lobster, which grew quite large in these protected waters, where fishing wasn't allowed. Well, except for the odd invasive shark. Jason grabbed her arm, gesturing furiously with his free hand at something in the deeper water. Zaan peered in the direction he indicated. The bulky shadow ahead could only be the grandfather groper, a giant blue Queensland groper that probably weighed more than she did. Not that he would ever know the indignity of a fishing hook or a set of weighing scales, while he ruled the lagoon. He wasn't afraid of humans either, so Zaan pulled Jason toward the huge fish. He hung back a little, reluctant to get too close, so Zaan did something she normally wouldn't. She dropped down right in the fish's path, removed her snorkel and pursed her lips at the fish. Not that she wanted to kiss the animal's thick, blubbery lips, but Zaan was pretty sure she wasn't the fish's type either. Jason got the message when the fish simply swam by her, so close his scales brushed her skin. Despite his size, this fish was nothing to fear. Jason circled the groper for a few minutes, before Zaan led him away through the shark nursery. There weren't many sharks in there now. The tiger shark had eaten too many of the babies, and the next generation of black-tipped reef sharks wouldn't be born for months yet. The sheltered cove was empty but for a few small rays, which flew from their shallow sandy hiding spots as Zaan approached. Something brushed against her chest, leaving a mild sting, and Zaan waved her hand to encourage whatever it was to swim away from her. The last thing she needed was one of the anemone branches stuck in her bikini again. That thing had left welts behind that took days to heal. Where to next, she wondered. There were more turtles on the other side of the cove, grazing the algae that grew in the shallows. Jason might like more turtles, so she cut across the cove, gesturing for him to follow. Yearling sharks swam below them in the deeper water, fish as long as her arm and probably about as round too. Barbecue-sized, she'd heard recreational fishermen call them, and they were right. Scaled and gutted, you could fit a whole black-tipped reef shark yearling wrapped in foil lengthwise on a barbecue grill. Not that she intended to tell Jason that. Like all the other life in the lagoon, these sharks were protected. Sure enough, there were turtles aplenty having their mid-morning munch, including a scarred leatherback that had to be older than she was, it was so big. She could have sat on the creature's shell with room to spare. They must have spent at least half an hour drifting through the algae meadow. Jason was fascinated by the turtles, and Zaan didn't want to rush him. Her lower back gave a sudden twinge and Zaan rubbed at it absently. Perhaps she shouldn't have helped move the new furniture into Villa Maxima yesterday, but she'd wanted their most luxurious villa to look perfect, and that couch had been half a meter off where it belonged. The pain became more insistent and Zaan wondered if maybe it was that time of the month again. It didn't usually hurt this much though, or come on so suddenly. Reluctantly, she told Jason they should start heading in. He grinned and pulled out his mouthpiece. "Race you back," he suggested. Actually, that might not be a bad idea, she thought, as she set off across the lagoon. Her tummy twisted, and for a moment Zaan thought she was going to be sick. Not in the lagoon. Not now. Gritting her teeth, she concentrated on her strokes, working with a powerful kick to carry her to shore where she could throw up all over the sand if she needed to. She heard Jason call something from behind her, but Zaan didn't slow. He wouldn't distract her from her course. She needed to reach the shore. Zaan's chest felt like there was a steel band wrapped around her ribs, not letting her breathe even as she dragged air in through her snorkel. She must be unfit from not swimming for a few weeks through the bad weather, she decided, pushing herself to go faster. Jason hadn't swum for about as long, so he was no fitter than she. She could still win this. Her knees grazed sand and Zaan leaped to her feet, stumbling as the water slowed her strides up the beach. Her chest hurt even more now, and her back felt like someone had hit her with a cattle prod or stabbed her maybe. Zaan fell face first on the sand, gritting her teeth against the pain. Why wouldn't it go away? Water splashed against her skin, every droplet like a rubber bullet, painful but bouncing off without penetrating. She wanted to say something, but couldn't seem to unlock her jaw to get the words out. Xanthi. Are you okay? Jason panicked. She squeezed her eyes shut as he touched her, grasping her shoulders to flip her over onto her back. The slight impact as her back hit the sand jolted her teeth apart, and a pitiful moan escaped. For a moment she saw Jason's face, his mouth and eyes wide with horror. "I'll go get help," he said. Gone. He was gone. Her back hurt. Her chest hurt. Every damn muscle in her body hurt. She'd heard about pain scales where 1 was barely hurting and 10 was practically unbearable. Childbirth was meant to be a 10. She wondered what happened if you hit 11. Was that when you died? Your body just shut down, unable to process the pain, so it gave you relief the only way it could. That'd be real nice right now. If someone would just switch off the electric current running through her whole body, that would be wonderful. A new face swam into view. Angel. The last person Zan wanted to see right now, while she was lying helpless on a beach. Hardly the capable hotel manager she was supposed to be. "Can you hear me?" Angel asked. "Yes," Zan managed to whisper. "Where does it hurt?" Everywhere. Chest. "Can't breathe," Zan gasped. "There's something here on her chest. Caught under her bikini top. I'll get it out. You get that first aid kit open." Sunlight glinted on metal. A knife. A huge sharp knife that looked like a more lethal version of Zan's diving knife. The blade came down, scraping across her skin. Zan whimpered. Would it hurt less if the girl stabbed her? At least the pain would stop. "Get the flying doctors out here," Angel bellowed. "Tell them I need fentanyl, oxygen, and we needed it 15 minutes ago. Jason, do you want her to die or not?" A sharp prick seared Zan's arm. Zan didn't care anymore. Darkness enveloped her, dragging her down, and it was good. 36. Zan woke to the worst hangover she'd ever known. Worse, she couldn't remember drinking anything. And it wasn't just her head aching either, her whole body hurt, like she'd been hit by a road train. Except there weren't any vehicles at Romance Island Resort, unless you counted the electric golf cart maintenance now shared with housekeeping. Zan definitely hadn't left the island, she had too much to do in preparation for that woman's wedding. The one who wanted to dance on top of the lagoon. The crazy woman who'd also pulled a knife on her, Zan remembered now. Which would make her either dead or in hospital. She forced her eyes open and took a look around. Beeping machinery. Foam-paneled ceiling with old-school institutional fluorescent strip lighting, above a single bed that she'd been pinned to with bedsheets tucked in so tightly there would be no escape. And in the visitor chair beside her. "Stay away from me," Zan croaked at Angel. The girl raised her eyebrows. "Most of my patients thank me for saving their life." Patience. Bridezilla didn't have any patience. She wanted to build over the lagoon. Angel tapped a name badge clipped to her shirt. Dr. Alana Miller, it read. A thought niggled in the back of Zan's mind. Yes, the girl had been introduced to her by that name, not Angel. Not a real doctor, Zan rasped. Angel, Alana, whoever she was, poured a cup of water from the jug on the table and handed it to Zan. "I am, and even Jason knows it. He might have panicked when you collapsed, but he came straight to me. He grabbed my arm and dragged me halfway across your island too. I honestly think he would have carried me if I hadn't come to your assistance. Definitely not normal behavior for him, but then, he's been different since he met you," Joe said, "so I shouldn't be surprised. He even pulled some strings in the health department and got me transferred up here from Fiona Stanley Hospital, just to take care of you. As though the doctors here can't handle an irukandji sting." A what? The word sounded vaguely familiar, but Zan's head was too fuzzy to make sense of it. A tiny box jellyfish. About this big. She held her finger and thumb an inch apart. It had hitched a ride in your bikini top, splaying its tentacles over your heart. And speaking of your heart, it appears to be fine, despite some tachycardia overnight. Your blood pressure's back to normal too. In fact, if you don't develop any further complications, you could be home within the week, making plans to drain the lagoon and turn it into tennis courts. Zaan drained her cup. "You're not touching the lagoon," she growled. "That was my poor attempt at a joke, I'm afraid." The doctor tossed the empty cup in the rubbish bin. "I said you'd want to fill the lagoon in when you found out you'd nearly been killed by one of the resident jellyfish, but Jason said you wouldn't want it changed, no matter how many killer jellyfish lived there." For once, I guess he was right. "They don't live there," Zaan insisted. "We swim in that water every day. We never saw any jellyfish." Angel shrugged. "Well, I know I did. The one that stung you. Good thing I had my knife on me. If I'd touched it, I'd probably be in the bed next to you. The doctors here sent it down to the museum in Perth to see if the staff there can identify the species. Not that we need to know that to treat you, thank goodness. It's not like a snake, we don't have an antivenom for these things. Wish we did. Jason might not have been pacing the corridors all night, upsetting all the staff." Zaan fixed her gaze on Angel. "I don't believe you. Jason hates hospitals. He'd rather jump out of a helicopter than be here." Angel shrugged. "I didn't believe it either. I've only seen him willingly enter a hospital once before, and even then he didn't stay very long. Now I can't get him to leave." "Where is he now then?" Zaan asked. "Probably getting more coffee, or using the bathroom. He's been stomping up and down the corridor outside your room, waiting for me to tell him you're awake." "If he cared so much, why wasn't he here?" Angel coughed. I think I hear his footsteps again. He'll stick his head in shortly. You might want to cover that up." She pointed at the cannula taped to Zaan's wrist with a blood-spotted dressing. Zaan blinked at her arm for a moment before she remembered why. "Oh, of course. Don't want him fainting in here." She stuck her arm under the sheet, then looked up to find Angel staring at her in surprise. "What?" "He told you. He doesn't like anyone knowing except, well, family." Angel coughed again. "Well, that explains a lot." She rose. "I'll go put him out of his misery." She crossed the room and cracked open the door. "She's awake, Jason, and asking for you." Zaan opened her mouth to contradict her, but she was distracted by Jason bursting into the room. He beamed at her for a moment before he grabbed Angel around the waist and lifted her off her feet in a crushing hug. Angel struggled free, shoving him away much like Zaan might have. The knife didn't make an appearance at all. "I'll leave you two alone for a bit, okay?" Straightening her clothes, the grumpy girl left. Jason didn't seem to notice or to care. "You're all right." He dived forward to hug Zaan too, though a lot more carefully than his hug with Angel. "I was so scared." Zaan's heart rate picked up, and was amplified by the beeping machinery behind her. It was the surprise at Jason's hug, she told herself fiercely. Not because she enjoyed being cuddled by her boss. Even if he had sort of saved her life. Jason threw himself in the visitor's chair. "Joe said she'd kill me if you didn't wake up. She's the one who sent the flowers." He waved at a display of orchids beside the water jug. "I'd have gotten you flowers too, but I didn't know what you like." Nor did she really. No one had ever bought Zaan flowers. And they probably never would. Jason's worry wasn't for her so much as his own precious skin, if his sister said she'd kill him. Good thing she hadn't enjoyed being in his arms then, seeing as the contact meant nothing to him. "All my favorite plants grow in the ocean, and they don't really have flowers," Zaan said. "I can see why. That coral looked so cool yesterday. All those colors and the turtles. I can't wait to go snorkeling with you again." Jason's smile slowly faded as his brain caught up with his mouth. "When you're okay, and if there aren't any more killer jellyfish in the lagoon, that is," he added. Zaan wanted to know about the killer jellyfish situation too, before she went for another swim. "Yeah. I guess you'll be giving up your morning swims now too, after that." "Oh yeah. Yeah, Jason replied, looking like his thoughts were back at the resort. Definitely not in the hospital room anyway. Zan hid her smile. If she could be anywhere else, she would be too. 37. Jason couldn't take his eyes off her. He'd nearly lost her. Fuck it, she'd nearly died. He couldn't lose Xanthi. Couldn't. She was the only friend he had. They'd survived a fucking fire together. And that cyclone. Losing her to a fucking jellyfish smaller than his thumb? Fuck that. He'd begged Angel to help her, and even that hadn't seemed like enough until now. Now that Zan was finally awake and talking and looking at him like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had, a bit. Without her. That's why he couldn't lose her. Marry me, he said, or he tried to, but the words didn't come out. He cleared his throat and tried again. Marry me. What? He seized her hand, the one on top of the sheet. The other one was still tucked into bed at her side. Marry me, Xanthi. She eased her fingers free and shook her head. Don't be silly. I've never been more serious in my life, he replied, wishing he'd brought the ring. That one the Pearl Farms jeweler had crafted just for her. Then she'd know how serious he was. But you're still being silly. I've told you, you don't need to bring a wife to your friend's wedding. I've already agreed to go with you. Just because she thinks there's something going on between us when there isn't, doesn't mean you have to marry someone when you don't want to. But I do, Jason wanted to say. Zan was the one woman he'd do anything for. He'd done Gaia and that whole reality TV thing, all the while realizing that the woman he really wanted was right there. And he couldn't say anything because the first time they'd met, she'd threatened to take him to court for sexual harassment if he so much as breathed a word of his attraction to her. Did a marriage proposal count? You're still coming to the wedding, aren't you? Jason said instead. Yes, as long as they let me out of hospital before then. Zan glared at the machine beeping behind her. But there's no point in pretending there's something between us when there isn't. Because there isn't, right? He stared at her for a long moment and she didn't blink. Jason looked away first. No, there isn't, he mumbled. Good thing he hadn't brought the ring. If friendship was all she had to offer him, he'd grab it with both hands, and try not to fuck it up any more than he already had. Too bad if he wanted more. Even rock stars couldn't have everything. 38. By the time Zan returned to Romance Island Resort almost a week later, she already knew what the museum had said about the jellyfish that had nearly killed her. It was an irukandji species usually found in northern Queensland, which they'd never seen west of Darwin before. They'd sent an excited staff member up to drag a net through the lagoon looking for more of them, but after 2 days of finding no jellyfish at all, the poor woman went back to Perth, complaining that the turtles had probably eaten them all. Armed with all the advice she could stomach about stinger suits and proper first aid for box jellyfish stings, Zan flew home, wishing she'd never heard about the bloody irukandji, let alone been groped by one. Sho helped her out of the helicopter like he thought she was an invalid, and Jason waited on the helipad to keep an eye on her too, Zan assumed with a sigh. She wasn't ill. Both Angel and the hospital doctors had given her a clean bill of health, yet here she was, being coddled. It didn't stop there either. She wasn't allowed to work for a week, even if she was living on the island. Jason had arranged for catering to provide her with room service to her unit for her first week back, so an apprentice chef appeared on her doorstep as soon as she'd managed to get rid of Jason, asking her for her menu choices for that night's dinner and the following day. Zan protested that she was perfectly capable of showing up in the staff dining room for meals, but after a lot of Mr. Felix says from the apprentice and the chef she called in catering, Zan gave in. Sadly, that blue cheese gnocchi wasn't on the menu. No one could remember who'd made the batch they'd eaten, and none of the resort chefs said they'd ever made gnocchi with blue cheese before. At lunchtime, just as Zan was about to head to the staff dining room, Jason showed up with a picnic basket from catering, insisting on sharing it with her. She suggested they sit on the Penguin jetty with it, but Jason tried to talk her out of exerting herself by walking so far. It was enough to make her scream. In the end, Zahn rummaged through the basket, found something that looked like a sandwich, and marched off with it. It only took Jason a moment to catch up, with the basket bumping along at his side. "You're supposed to rest," he hissed. "I've spent a week lying in bed doing nothing while I feel fine," Zahn snapped. "I'm sick of rest and sick of staying inside. I have work piling up that no one's doing. If I rest this week, there'll be twice as much waiting for me next week." "There shouldn't be," Jason said slowly. "I mean, there'll be some stuff, but I told everyone to direct all your communications to me, like you did when Gaia was here and you were in Perth. I couldn't handle everything, but it's been pretty quiet. Most of it's wedding stuff. Angel still wants that decking, and I think it's a good idea. If we had a platform that went from the path to the jungle out into the dredged part of the lagoon, it's all sand under there." I talked to the environment officer, who found some old aerial photos of the island before the resort was built. That bit was actually dug out to make a beach that wasn't there before. "I've changed my mind. I don't want to go back to work yet," Zahn grumbled. Jason laughed. "Think about it though. On clear nights, we could open it up as a sort of beer garden extension to the pub. If we angle it right, the guests could even watch the moon rise over the lagoon. And I kind of like her idea about dancing under the stars. They're so clear out here." The first night he'd met Jason, he'd shown her the stars. Then she'd found him strange but compelling, the odd drunk man who wanted to share so much beauty, but asked for nothing from her in return. There'd been so many shooting stars, she'd run out of wishes while he babbled about fairy tales that didn't come true. She'd wished for a fairy tale then. The same thing Fung had wished for Jason, who said they were nothing but bullshit. Who knew? She couldn't have predicted her life would lead her here. "I still don't know any of the Southern Hemisphere constellations," Zahn admitted. "Maybe we should see if we can get someone to run astronomy tours here once a week in the dry season. I know just the guy. I'll call him later and see what he thinks." Jason turned to her. "So, we're on for Angel's dancing deck?" Zahn sighed. "As long as it doesn't damage the rest of the lagoon, yes. We should try and get the same guy who did the new pool deck at the Pearl Farm." Jason cheered. "Then you'll dance with me under the stars. I'm looking forward to it, Xanthi." Zahn wasn't sure what to say to that, so she said nothing. "Philly gave me the list of confirmed guests too. I didn't know what to do with it," Jason admitted. "Give it to me. I need to arrange their accommodation. Angel's booked the whole island, but she left the arrangements up to the resort. I'll go through it later to see if there's enough rooms for everybody." For a moment, Zahn considered changing her mind and agreeing to rest for another week. But all the work would still be there waiting when she got back. Best to deal with it now. "After we have a picnic on the Penguin Jetty," she finished. "It's a date," he responded. "No, it isn't." 39. When Jason wasn't looking, Zahn sneaked into her office and turned on her computer. As she'd suspected, the list of emails was into the hundreds and growing as she watched. One popped up with a red flag marking it as urgent, so Zahn clicked on it. She read it once, then a second time, just to make sure she'd understood it properly. It purported to be from a major international hotel chain, offering her a job managing a new boutique hotel on the East Coast. The salary they offered was almost double what she was earning at the moment. It had to be a joke, she decided, ready to delete it. As if right on cue, Jason sauntered in. "Caught you. I'm going to ask the IT guys to revoke your access to this office until next week." "A week off means no working, Zahn?" She shut down her computer before he saw the email. It wasn't as if she was even considering the offer, but it still didn't feel right to tell Jason someone had tried to headhunt her. Through her work email, no less. It left a sour taste in her mouth. Zahn rose. "You're right." She wanted to laugh at his wide-eyed surprise, but instead she turned to grab a few sheets off the printer. "All I'll work on today will be the accommodation arrangements for Angel's wedding. Nothing else." "I'll help you," he offered. "Come over to my place. I have a bigger dining table than you do." We can lay it out there, and if we're still working on it come dinner time, catering can bring our meals to mine." Zaan was happy to agree. Better to receive room service at the villas than at her unit in the staff compound. She'd never allocated herself special privileges like Maya had, because she truly believed she was no better than the staff she worked with. She didn't share every meal with them in the staff dining room, but that's because she had her own kitchen, where she could prepare her own. That was different to room service though. She followed him back to the villa and spread the pages across the table. Right, match the guests to rooms, she thought. Go. She ran out of people before the hotel was even half full. That couldn't be right, Angel had booked the whole island. Yet the empty lines in her spreadsheet told her there weren't any more names on the list. "Can you check if I'm missing a page?" she asked Jason. "This can't be all of them." "What do you mean?" he asked, claiming the chair beside her. "You've got all her family, me and Joe plus his family and friends. It was never going to be a big wedding." "But surely this can't be all of them. She said she's paying to fly everyone here, and she's already paid for the island, so it's not like people aren't coming because of the cost. The new decking, all the extras she's asking for less than 40 people? How could anyone have that few friends?" Jason shrugged. "She's lived in witness protection for years, and rockstar life doesn't really let you make many friends either. She's not like you. If you got married, most of Brewing would want to be there to cheer you on. You know everybody." "Good thing I'm never getting married then. It'd cost a fortune," Zaan muttered. Jason said something that Zaan didn't hear, but two names on the bottom of the list had drawn her attention more than anything Jason might have to say. "Why are there ASIO agents on this guest list?" She pointed at the names of the two anti-terrorist agents who'd interrogated her last year, when Jason had made that stupid comment about being happy to host terrorists at his hotel. Jason shrugged. "That's where he used to work. I guess they're his friends, being old workmates and all." Zaan allocated them hotel rooms at the opposite end of the hotel from her unit. She wanted to see as little of the agents as possible. "I gave the couple the honeymoon suite, but there's a note next to these names asking for our best accommodation." Zaan peered at the paper. "Mosin, I can't even pronounce the rest of it. Sounds Arabic. ASIO agents and Arabs. Now that sounded like trouble before they'd even arrived." "Probably is. Her mother's family is from the Middle East. Angel was born there." Another shrug. "So give them Villa Maxima. And don't put Angel in a hotel room. Give her the villa next to mine. And give Joe the one on the other side." "Why? You don't want to be next door to them on their wedding night, do you?" Zaan couldn't imagine anything worse than hearing honeymooners on their first night together, when you'd been in love with one of them. Torture, surely. "Not really, but that's the way it's always been. Whenever we were touring. Me on one side, Joe on the other." "Just do it," Jason said shortly. "So who gets the other villas?" "We still have Pink Tata and Albina. Her family and his. Stick her father in one and his family in the other one. Albina's the one with the extra bedrooms, right? Give that one to his family, seeing as Angel's dad will be by himself. Allocate one of the extra bedrooms in Albina to the groom, so his parents can keep an eye on him the night before the wedding. Don't want the bachelor party getting too out of hand." Jason smirked. Zaan stared. "They haven't mentioned anything about parties the night before the wedding." "Well, she wouldn't, would she? Most brides don't like bachelor parties, though they're no worse than hens nights. Joe will take care of the hens party though, so she'll let you know if she needs anything. Us blokes are easy, as long as there's food and drink, we'll be fine." A wicked grin. "Don't worry, I'll take care of the bachelor party." Of course Zaan worried, but she had so much to worry about. One more thing on the list didn't make much difference. At least she had the room allocations sorted. "I got the quotes back on the deck, by the way," Jason said, swiping his finger across his tablet screen. "Oh. Looks like we'll be dancing under the stars sooner than we thought," he replied. Baz's carpenter says he's free next week, and the lumberyard in town had everything he needs. Let's take a look then, Zahn said, taking Jason's tablet. The sooner they got that decking done, the better. 40. Hi and welcome to Romance Island Resort. I'm Zahn Lane, the hotel manager here. And you are, Zahn repeated for what felt like the 100th time. She handed the helicopter load of guests to Philly and Rita, who escorted them to reception, where they'd receive their wristbands and directions to their assigned rooms. Dennis was doing duty on the jetty, mostly dealing with the contractors delivering things for the wedding. Both Baz and Sho checked their IDs against the list of people allowed on the island before they were allowed to board a boat or an aircraft, but Angel's strict security measures called for everyone to be double-checked, so Zahn did as she was told. As Zahn sent this group of guests on their way, Dennis came running up with a huge grin on his face. "We've solved the drone problem," he cried. Now that was good news. Dealing with uninvited guests was easy when you controlled access to the island, and everyone in town had spread the word that the island was off-limits to charter pilots and boats for the weekend, but Zahn hadn't considered anyone would send flying drones equipped with cameras to spy on the island until she'd seen one hovering over the lagoon a week earlier. Reporters used remote control helicopters to take their pictures now? Apparently they did, Trevor the security specialist had told her. Somehow word had leaked to the media that the rockstar wedding of the year was at Romance Island this weekend, and everyone wanted a glimpse of Jay with his bride. No one had bothered to correct them that it was Angel's wedding, not Jason's, so more reporters arrived every day, filling up the hotels in town. How? Zahn demanded. Baz enlisted the local shooting club. Great. Solving a problem with guns. That could go wrong in so many ways. No weapons on the island, Zahn said flatly. We've made that pretty clear. Dennis waved away her concern. And they won't be. He invited the local shooting club to the Pearl Farm for the weekend, and offered to sponsor a competition. Shooting aerial targets. His grin widened as Zahn caught on. And a special bonus prize for anyone who can take down an aerial drone he's bought specially for the competition. They're now fully booked with shooters from Perth to Darwin, from farmers with rifles to professionals who've been to the Olympics, and Baz is talking about making it an annual thing. Zahn couldn't help laughing. Only in the Kimberley could you do something like that. I hope he does well out of it. Angel should be pleased. Has she arrived on your end yet? The girl definitely hadn't been in any of the helicopters, and the wedding was tomorrow. Dennis shook his head, hurrying to take shelter with Zahn as Sho took off. 5 minutes later, another helicopter took its place. Finally, Zahn thought, recognizing Angel, though she didn't know the pilot or the man beside her. One of the porters helped load their bags onto a trolley, while Angel and the man headed for Zahn. Hi. At Jason's request, I've given you Villa Akoya over the other side of the lagoon, she told Angel. As you probably saw as you flew in, the decking you asked for is complete and the dance floor is in one of the function rooms, ready to be laid out for tomorrow night. Angel nodded, then glanced at the man at her side. Zahn introduced herself, holding out her hand to shake his. Nathan Miller, otherwise known as the groom. His handshake was a quick press before he released her. Dark circles under his eyes said he hadn't slept much lately. He didn't seem like the sort of brute Jason had described, but that didn't mean Jason was wrong. After all, she'd only just met the man. Zahn said, I've set you up with a suite in the hotel, but if you'd prefer to share with your family, they're in Villa Albina, which is... He's staying with me, Angel interrupted. She snapped her fingers at the porter. Take all our gear to Villa Akoya. Zahn was lost for words. But the bride usually, the morning of the wedding, it's bad luck too. Angel's mouth smiled but her eyes turned cold. Oh, there'll be much worse luck if anyone tries to separate us. We'll take the villa. She tugged Nathan's arm and he followed her obediently away from the helipad. Zahn stared after them but not for long. The helicopter was soon ready for takeoff, with another buzzing beast waiting to take its place. 41. It was nearly dark by the time the final flight arrived. Zahn recognized the sound of Show's helicopter, and switched on the landing lights to help him find his way down. Show must be tired, Zahn decided, as she watched him land the aircraft at a 90-degree angle to his usual position, with his tail pointed away from the gate. Very tired, she amended as a small dark shape slid out of the pilot's seat and onto the ground. Show didn't let anyone pilot his aircraft. Ever. Zahn stepped forward to challenge the figure with her standard greeting. Hi, I'm Zahn Lane. The girl unwrapped the scarf covering her head. Yes, I know. Even in the dim lights, Zahn could see the similarity between her and Angel. Family, she supposed. A man landed heavily on the helipad, then crossed the concrete to stand beside the girl. You are the hotel manager, yes? Zahn gave a curt nod. I am Mohsen Rezaei, he said grandly. The Middle Eastern man, Zahn thought, glad to tick the final name off her list. And this is your wife? Zahn wasn't sure she could pronounce the woman's name. My niece Parisa, Mohsen said smoothly. My wife is in Rome, looking after some business interests. Alarm bells rang in Zahn's head. I'll have to check. You see, her name isn't on the guest list and only approved guests are allowed on the island. Show should have told you this before you stole his helicopter, Zahn realized as her heart sank. This was exactly the sort of thing the resort's extra security measures were supposed to prevent. I did, someone croaked. A third figure clambered out of the helicopter, somewhat stiffly. I checked before they boarded. She's a relative of the bride. Just send them to their rooms, Zahn. Show's eyes implored her to cooperate. Zahn sighed and sent them with Rita to reception. Once they were out of earshot, she turned on Show. Why weren't you flying? She's an assassin. She's got more knives under that jacket than I've ever seen one person carry. Guns too, the kind that aren't legal here in Australia. She said she was flying the helicopter, not me, but she'd let me live to fly home if I kept quiet until they'd landed. You watch out for her. I'm going home before she changes her mind. And with that, Show hopped into the pilot's seat, closed the door behind him and lifted off in record time. Bugger. Zahn pulled her phone out of her pocket and called Trevor, Angel's security specialist. I have a problem, she said after he'd answered. Mohsen didn't bring his wife. He has someone called Parisa who he says is his niece, but my pilot says is an assassin. An armed assassin. They're headed for reception now. Dr. Miller is at reception, sorting out an issue with her wristband, I believe. I'm on my way. Trevor ended the call without another word. Zahn broke into a run. Maybe she could catch up to them and persuade them to come to Villa Maxima with her. The last thing she needed was something getting injured or worse, killed on the island. Zahn took a shortcut through the jungle, arriving at the lobby door just as Mohsen did. The lobby looked empty, without even Philly manning the reception desk. Thank goodness. Let me get that for you, she panted, summoning a professional smile. She wrenched open the door and stood aside to let them in. Her timing couldn't have been worse. Philly walked into the lobby, followed by Angel and Dennis. Kyana. Mohsen beamed. Angel inclined her head. You made it. I thought you said you'd had some trouble with airport security. Mohsen's expression darkened. Yes, I did. My bodyguards weren't allowed to enter the country. They detained me too, but your country's security personnel can't tell a terrorist from a businessman. Women, they are much more lenient with. That's why I brought my niece Parisa instead. Niece? Angel's tone turned deadly. That would make her Lilapar's daughter, Mohsen said smoothly. I forget that you haven't met Parisa. This is Kyana, Fatima's daughter. The two women faced each other, mirror images of the same deadly threat. Angel's fingers lingered on her arm where Zahn knew she kept a knife, while Parisa's hand hovered over her own arm. Parisa had a slight height advantage over Angel, but that was about all the difference between them. The girls could have been sisters. Ones who wanted to kill each other. Parisa was the first to relax, dropping her hands by her sides. Kyana. I believe I owe you a debt. Angel didn't relax at all. She deserved what she got. My father's killer deserved much, it is true. That is why I waited and trained, so that I could do the job properly when the time came. You waited too damn long, Angel snapped. She killed my mother. The woman who would be my sister-in-law. And she tried to kill me. You owe me, all right? Indeed. A long moment passed while both women stared at each other. Zahn wanted to scream in frustration. Philly had fled, but Trevor and Dennis hovered by the exits, looking for a chance to de-escalate matters, Zahn hoped. Mosen clapped his hands, the sound echoing loudly in the tiled lobby. Excellent. I'm sure Parisa would like to hear your memories of her mother Kyana, when time permits. Perhaps over a high tea? Angel's hands dropped to her sides. Perhaps. She nodded to Parisa, Mosen, then Trevor, before turning on her heel and leaving the lobby. Well, this wedding just got interesting, Zahn thought. Rockstars, security, a possible terrorist, and now an assassin? She'd prefer another round with the jellyfish. With a cyclone thrown in. 42. Zahn couldn't believe how nervous she felt. Anyone would think she was tomorrow's bride, not the girl sleeping in Villa Acoya tonight. Yet here she was, pacing the length of the Penguin jetty again, wishing for some sort of inner peace that swam just out of reach in the waves below as the tide rushed in. The helicopter was safely on the Pearl Farm landing pad, with the Argo moored nearby. All the guests who were attending tomorrow's wedding had arrived, and there would be no way on or off the island until Sunday. The only communication with the mainland was via the radio in Dennis' office. Now the satellite uplink and mobile phone tower had been disabled for the event, as per the bride's imperious instructions. The kitchen had closed for the night, though one chef remained on call in case of any late-night room service requests. The jungle was open for a few more hours, but it had looked like the guests were saving themselves for tomorrow, so they'd all gone to their rooms early. Zahn hadn't seen a single soul since she'd left Marcel at the bar. Even Jason seemed on his best behavior. Speak of the devil. I bet tomorrow's will be the most organized wedding in the history of weddings, no matter what fuck-up has you pacing. Go on, tell me. What's gone wrong? Jason called from the head of the jetty. Nothing, Zahn admitted, not wanting to mention the assassin in their midst, then added, yet. Nothing's gone wrong yet, but that's the thing about weddings, isn't it? Something has to go wrong because it can't be perfect. Sure it can. Jason strode out to her. You're organizing it. If anyone can hold the perfect event, it's you, the patron saint of hotel management and weddings. Zahn snorted. You're laying it on a bit thick, aren't you? I thought only the Pope could name saints, and then only after they're dead. I'm still breathing and I plan to be for a long while yet, though that could change tomorrow if I mess up this wedding. It's my first, so I'm bound to. Jason reached her end of the jetty and wrapped a reassuring arm around her shoulders. You won't? If anything goes wrong, it won't be your fault. She'll blame it on me, he said blithely, nodding at the dark shadow of Villa Acoya. Zahn shrugged off his arm. I take it all the lights out means she's going for maximum beauty sleep tonight? Maybe. The way Jason said it, it sounded more like a no. First night in a new place, she usually gets an early night. Joe and I would take it in turns, staying up, waiting. Because, well, it was better than getting woken up by it. Zahn squinted at the villa. Woken up by what? Does she and her boyfriend have noisy sex on the first night? That's hardly unusual behavior for a hotel. At least hotels like this one have soundproofing. At the Backpackers where I used to work, you could hear. A piercing scream came from the villa, followed by another, louder than the first. Frogs in the bathroom. Zahn would wager a week's wages on it. She marched up the jetty, intent on rescuing the bride from her uninvited guests. The back of her shirt snagged on something, pulling her up short. What the? She twisted around trying to unhook it, but Jason held her fast. Let go. More screaming issued from the villa. This time it sounded like there were words in the screaming, most of them abusive. "Jason, let go," Zahn insisted. "I need to help." "Let him do it," Jason said darkly. Zahn's blood ran cold. "You mean he's in there with her? And she's screaming like that? What if he's trying to kill her? I can't just stand her and let some prick." She wrenched free of Jason and set off again. This time he grabbed her, not her shirt. Both arms clamped across her middle. "You can't. If you go in there, you'll get hurt. So come with me. I'll page security, and between us, we'll get him away from her." Zahn lifted her wristband to tap the emergency code. "No. No security. No one goes in there." "Bloody coward." Zahn stomped on Jason's foot and he released her. "You mean to tell me you'd let some asshole beat up your friend because you're scared of him? I thought you had more balls than that, Jason Felix, but maybe I was wrong. I'll break it up on my own. You just watch me." The screaming had stopped, shrouding the villa in eerie silence. "She sleeps with a knife and a taser. If you burst into her room, she'll hit you with one or both. You know there's a character in the Harry Potter books that did bad things to people if you woke him up? Well, that bloke's nothing to her. We had a security guard once who was too stupid to follow orders. He got a knife in the chest. He was lucky to survive." Zahn stopped. "Your friend would stab me?" "Probably not." She threw the knife at the guard from the other side of her hotel suite. Not particularly reassuring. "So if it's quiet now, that means?" Zahn ventured. "She's awake most likely. I hope she tased him. She got a real heavy-duty taser. The aftershocks can seize your muscles up for hours afterwards." Jason's teeth flashed white as he grinned. "You sound like you have first-hand experience," Zahn said. "Nah, not personally. She's used it a couple times though, and she paints a pretty fucking clear image when she wants to. She can knock a guy out with that thing." Zahn didn't feel comfortable standing here when anything could be going on in the villa. "Still, I should go and at least knock on the door to ask if she's all right." She thought a moment, then added, "Or if he needs medical attention." As if on command, the lights clicked on in the villa and two figures came into view, walking through the living area to the veranda. "Oh, I really wanted her to hit him," Jason said softly. Nathan swept Angel up in his arms. "Come on, it's time for that sex on the beach." Angel laughed, sounding younger and more carefree than Zahn thought possible. "No, it isn't. Plenty of time for that sort of thing after the wedding. We're awake and the beach is just down this path." "We've got time now," Nathan insisted, carrying her down the steps and out of sight. A long moment later, they heard a shriek mingled with a deeper shout. Angel's voice was clearer. "I told you. The tides up here are huge. The beach will be back in the morning." The couple walked back into view, hand in hand as they ascended to the veranda. "I've seen enough," Jason muttered, marching back to his villa. Zahn watched the pair head inside their own villa, then share a cup of milk before ambling down the corridor to the bedrooms. Despite all the security measures and Angel's celebrity status, these two looked like any normal couple, about to be married in the morning. Two people who planned to share a happy future. For a moment, Zahn envied them. To be so sure of someone that you wanted to spend the rest of your life with them, no, it was a crazy risk to take. One she never would, she vowed, as she followed their example and headed off to her own bed. Tomorrow would be a long day. 43. "I can't do this without you." 6 simple words that were the reason Zahn found herself standing on North Beach, beside a white carpet, with Jason clinging to her arm like a terrified toddler. A toddler with a very firm grip. She should have been sorting out details, decorations, last-minute menu changes or whatever else needed to be done, but she kept her promise and stood at Jason's side while the woman he'd loved for most of his life walked down the aisle in a ruby-colored wedding dress. Its Middle Eastern style, heavily embroidered in white and gold, suited the diminutive bride. She wore no veil, so her dark hair gleamed in the sun, pinned and curled so that it fell to just above shoulders. Her fingers rested on her father's arm as he walked beside her, but her eyes were fixed on her grey-clad groom. Out of respect for Broom's tropical climate, he wore no tie or jacket, just a white shirt with a pale grey vest and pants. Nathan looked like he was going to cry, Zahn thought as he stared at his bride. He wasn't the only one, either. Angel passed her bouquet, a carefully sculpted cascade of frangipani flowers, to Joe, where it blended with the flower print of her dress. Deliberately, Zahn was sure. Zahn let her mind wander as the wedding celebrant said things she probably repeated for every wedding. She was brought back by a particularly violent squeeze from Jason that nearly crushed her fingers. The wedding vows, Zahn realized, curious to hear whether the couple had chosen to be boring and traditional, or if they'd written their own, to be parodied after the celebrant when they forgot the words. Traditional be damned, it seemed. They said their vows in unison, their words simple but poignant enough for Zahn to remember them days later. I am yours and you are mine, to love, care for and protect. I will share your pleasure and your pain. I will stand with you through anything life has in store for us. Rings, kisses, signing the relevant paperwork, none of that was anything out of the ordinary, and Jason seemed to relax, or at least grow resigned to the marriage. Zahn's heart ached for him, though her throbbing fingers weren't quite as sympathetic. 44. The rest of the day felt like an anticlimax, after all the work she'd put in. Not even a peep out of the assassin, though Trevor and Dennis kept a careful eye on the girl the whole day. When someone's father stood up to make a speech, Zahn took the opportunity to do one final check on her staff. All the food had been served, so the only duties that remained were clearing away the dessert dishes and serving drinks to guests until the wedding reception ended. She could relax, drink a glass of champagne and maybe even take a turn on the dance floor. Zahn had expected a live band, given Chaya's reputation. After all but a handful of musicians in the world would have jumped at the chance to perform at this rockstar wedding. Angel or Alana or whatever her name was would only have needed to ask, Zahn was sure of it. But the bride had chosen a DJ instead, a sound guy Jason evidently knew well, judging by how happily they were talking together as the DJ set up his equipment. Joe's voice blasted through the sound system, bringing Zahn's attention back to the speeches. I've known Caitlin since primary school and I could tell you some stories, she began. Zahn listened as Joe described her friend's budding talents as a doctor, musician and MMA fighter, making everyone laugh. Joe continued, but there are 3 lessons she taught me that I'll never forget, and Nathan, as her husband, you'd better not forget them either. Lesson 1, size matters. A roar of laughter echoed across the lagoon, fading as Joe explained that she meant the size of hearts and love and other non-R-rated things, then launched into a second rambling point that Zahn didn't quite catch. And last but not least, lesson 3. Love conquers all. I've played to packed stadiums right alongside her. I've shared a coffee with her the morning after she's worked all night to save a patient's life. All exhilarating, awesome moments in anyone's life, and we've celebrated them all. But I've never seen her as happy as she is today, when she married the man she loves. So I'd like to propose a final toast tonight to the bride and groom, Mr. and Mrs. Whoops, Dr. Miller. Zahn raised her glass and drank the lot. Yes, she deserved a whole glass of champagne to celebrate a job well done. She'd never seen a wedding proceed so smoothly. The DJ called the guests to assemble around the edges of the dance floor for the bridal waltz. The bride and groom hung back, sharing a kiss while everyone's attention was elsewhere. Everyone except Zahn. A sharp crack rent the air, followed by 3 more in quick succession. The newlyweds dropped out of sight too quickly for Zahn to see whether the gunman had hit them, or if they'd simply taken shelter behind a table. She glanced around, noticing several others doing the same thing, but most of the guests stood on the dance floor decking, staring out over the lagoon. Zahn reached the couple first. The bride was barely visible beneath the groom, a deliberate move on his part, Zahn decided, as he covered both his head and hers. There. Can't celebrate love without fucking fireworks. Jason shouted somewhere over on the deck. Congratulations. It's just fireworks, Nathan, Angel said, rolling him off her. She straddled his hips, her skirt pooling out like blood over them both. Look up. 4 more reports sounded. Seconds later, colors bloomed in the sky to the oohs and ahs of the guests. I thought. Nathan began. I know, his bride soothed. But I'm fine. You're fine. We're both safe and no one's trying to kill us here. I'm sorry. She placed her hand over his mouth. Say it. We're safe. We're safe, he repeated. You're safe. Yes. Angel smiled. I love you. And we're going to spend the rest of our lives together. A long, long time. Because I married you. Because I love you. Now kiss me. Because you told me to, he asked. Because you love me. Because you want to. Because today's our wedding day. She paused, then finished with, and because I'm your wife and I told you to. He sat up, wrapping his arms around the blood-dipped bride on his lap. Because you love me, he said slowly. Their kiss was slow and sensual, passionate in the extreme. Zahn found she had to look away as her insides flooded with heat. How long since someone had kissed her like that? Had anyone ever kissed her like that? Passion so hot it burned her several meters away, watching. She shouldn't be watching, Zahn told herself, hurrying to join the guests on the deck. Jason would be there and she'd promised him one dance. The newlyweds finally made their way to the dance floor. The music started and the pair twirled across the deck in their first dance as a married couple amid the strobe-like flashes from everyone's cameras. None of the pictures would make it onto social media tonight. All communications with the outside world were down, as per the bride's instructions. Zahn scanned the crowd looking for Jason, who was nowhere to be seen. But he had been here not long ago, watching the fireworks with the rest of them. Fireworks. That the couple hadn't expected. That no one had expected. Zahn sure as hell hadn't organized them. Jason must have. Had he seen the newlyweds' response? If he had, he'd have slunk off to sulk, most likely, she decided. Before she'd really thought it through, her feet had already started along the path that led to the villas. If he was sulking, he'd let her off that dance and she could go to bed after a very long day. The music followed her around the lagoon. Good thing there weren't any non-wedding guests on the island, as no one would be sleeping with that noise going on. Zahn had to give the DJ credit though, the music wasn't bad. And every track was worth dancing to. Maybe if she couldn't find Jason, she'd head back and join the party. After all, she did have an official invitation. She strode past the house and toward the jetty. It was pitch black out there, but she knew by now that's where he'd be. If she'd thought about it, she'd have brought a torch. Or even her phone, but that was sitting on her kitchen bench, switched off like the useless device it was out here. Jason, she ventured, stepping onto the boards. I'm not even sure of that anymore. This week I'm nobody. Definitely not a rock star. And now uninvited to the wedding. His voice came from close to the end, but it grew louder as his thumping footsteps brought him into view. Zahn managed a smile. You'll always be Jay Felix the rock star to me. Is that because you think I'm a dick too? His eyes glistened in the path lights. No, surely not with tears. With anyone else, Zahn would have tried to be diplomatic, but there was no use hiding her opinions from Jason. And she wanted to know the truth, which he'd respond with if she was honest. So she said, that depends. Did you do it on purpose? Did you know how he'd react? Jason shook his head. Fuck no. Like I said, real love has fireworks. I wanted it to be a surprise, my gift to them. I brought up one of the pyrotechnic guys who does the Australia Day fireworks. She always loved fireworks. She'd come down to the foreshore or Kings Park with us every year and we'd have a picnic and watch the sky show. No idea he'd go psycho. He knocked her down. Bastard knocked her down. And instead of taking a knife or a taser to him like she would anyone else, she just got up and pretended it was nothing. Then she threatened me if I didn't leave her wedding. So now I'm here. He waved at the jetty. Got 2 bottles of champagne though. The good stuff. Want one? The man owned the whole hotel, but he'd stolen 2 bottles of champagne from one of his guests. A girl who was crazier than he was. Zan shook her head. This was all too much for her. Yes, please, she said. Jason disappeared into the dark and returned a moment later with an unopened bottle of champagne, which he popped with gusto. All without spilling a drop. He handed it to her. Sorry, didn't bring glasses. I didn't expect to share. For anyone to notice he was gone. Anyone who cared anyway. Zan blinked back tears. Impulsively, she threw her arms around him in a hug made awkward by the champagne bottle she still held. I'm so sorry, Jason. Jason returned her hug, not the slightest bit awkward. He's going to kill her, isn't he? Fuck, how am I supposed to just stand by and wait for it to happen? Zan thought of the strange couple she'd watched all day, not the man who held her in what was a surprisingly comfortable embrace, and shook her head. I don't think he will. There's something not right there, but it's not. I know she's scared of something. They both are. But I don't think the danger's him. Even if it was, there's nothing you can do about it, except be willing to help if she asks for it. She's an adult and she married him. She gets to make her own decisions and her own mistakes. Like Zan nearly had with Jerome. Bloody hell. Squirming out of Jason's grasp, she brought the champagne bottle to her lips and gulped some down. When she looked around, she found Jason had disappeared. The pop of a champagne cork in the darkness pinpointed his location, as he returned with a second open bottle for himself. Drinking champagne, the genuine French stuff, out of the bottle, on a jetty with the rockstar owner of an island resort. Shit, but her life was crazy. Zan raised her bottle in a toast. To adults who do crazy stuff. Jason clunked his bottle against hers and they both drank. Crazy stuff indeed. 45. Sometime later, Zan set down her nearly empty champagne bottle. She couldn't have drunk all of it. Jason must have helped, she told herself, peering at the starlit waves beneath her swinging feet. It wasn't all that dark, not really, with the Milky Way shimmering across the sky. I should go home to sleep, she said, struggling to her feet. Bloody hell, she had drunk more than she'd thought. Zan wobbled as she fought to get her feet into her shoes for the walk back to her unit. Jason might have fallen asleep on the jetty, like so many nights before, but it wouldn't do for the hotel manager to imitate the rock star. Double standards, she thought muzzily. Why did you come out here, Zan? The shadow that was Jason sat up. You weren't uninvited. I'm sure you could have stayed at the reception until the end, when one of the psycho's buffed-up mates would offer to show you his incredible stamina for the rest of the night. Or is the helicopter pilot more your type? I forget. His buffed-up mates are ASIO agents who interrogated me last year. Not my type. Zan's voice turned cold. And not all of us look for the next person to pull into bed. Some of us have standards and integrity and self-respect, and we expect the same from anyone we choose to have a relationship with. A relationship, not a one-night stand. Not to mention, that would be unprofessional and against hotel policy. Fair enough, Jason replied, sounding completely unfazed. So why did you come out here? Zan sighed. He probably hadn't heard a word of what she'd said. In one ear, out the other. Bloody overgrown teenager. Because when I agreed to go to the wedding with you, I promised I'd dance with you. And that's what I love about you, Zan. Standards and integrity and all that shit. You keep your promises. Jason unfolded to his full height. Let's have that dance and we can go to bed. Zan frowned. Our own beds? Alone? It was Jason's turn to sigh. Yeah, that. Some of us are just destined to be alone. At least we have each other, right, Zan? That dance, she prompted. His arm was warm around her waist as his hand clasped hers. As if on command, the music across the lagoon morphed from a fast track into a much slower song. Her head was filled with champagne froth, making it hard to remember the steps. Let me lead. Just this once, Jason breathed in her ear, pulling her closer. It felt like the most natural thing in the world to have her body molded against his, just the thin fabric of her dress and his shirt between them. Rock stars didn't do ties or jackets for long. But they could dance. "Where'd you learn to dance like this?" she mumbled as he guided her effortlessly across the boards, not stepping on her toes at all. Laughter rumbled through his chest. Bloody hell, she was so close she could feel it. "Joe did ballroom dancing all through high school. She needed a partner, so she bribed me into it. It paid off though." His breath was warm on her neck. "What with? Alcohol? Girls?" "No. She agreed to be the drummer in my band, and she persuaded Caitlin to join as our guitarist. Before she was Angel, she was Caitlin. And now she is again, or so she says. But none of this would have happened if I hadn't agreed to dance." Zahn laughed with him. "People have done worse for fame." "Yeah, I have. But not tonight. Tonight I get to share one dance with you." "Yes." Zahn rested her head against his shoulder, just enjoying the moment. He was the only man she could dance with without him expecting more. No obligations. No expectations. Just Jason. The music stopped, Jason remarked, but he didn't let go of her. So it had. Across the lagoon, the party was over. So why did she want to linger a little longer here with him? "Xanthi," he breathed in her ear, drawing out the sibilants. "Kiss Xanthi?" "Yes. Kiss me." Zahn turned her head so she could feel his breath on her face. Just once. One dance, one kiss, and she'd go home. In the morning, she'd say she was too drunk to remember, but she wasn't. She wanted to know what it was like to kiss Jay Felix. Why so many girls had fallen for him. How he charmed all those girls into his bed. It wasn't just his dancing skills or his celebrity status. Something more. Her lips brushed his, burning like that first gulp from the bottle of Moet. "Xanthi, you're drunk," Jason murmured. He didn't move away though. Maybe she was. Maybe she wasn't. But for a moment, she wanted to pretend. Zahn grasped his shoulders and kissed him properly. For a moment, he stood as still and hard as a statue. Not moving, not responding. Then he melted, and the whole world moved. Once again, Jason took the lead, like the expert he was. Their tongues danced, and it didn't matter that Zahn didn't know the steps. He held her like he didn't intend to let her go. And she didn't want him to. Her blood fizzed with champagne bubbles, then warmed, sweeping her higher like one of the geezers she'd seen in New Zealand. In the distance, the music began again. One final song. In Jason's arms, she moved with him, dancing to a rhythm he knew better than she did. And still they kissed, because she couldn't bear to tear her lips from his. But he could. Yeah. Fireworks? Just like in the books? Jason cheered. What books? Love and kisses and fireworks, those sort of metaphors only happened in romance books. Realization dawned. All those girls. The books that went missing. You getting drunk in the library. You've been reading romance books? Fuck yeah. What women want, right? Romance books. A rock star who read romance books. Zahn's shoe caught in the gap between the boards and she stumbled. Jason caught her, but not in time. Together, they tumbled off the jetty. 46. Thank fuck it was high tide and not low, was all Jason had time to think before he hit the water. Remembering his high school surf life-saving classes, he dragged Zahn to the surface so she could breathe and headed for shore. Let go of me, you bloody fool. Have you forgotten I can swim better than you? Zahn snapped, tearing out of his grasp. Jason wasn't sure if the kick she delivered to his thigh was accidental or deliberate. But the deadly jellyfish. Jason began. They prefer calm water, like the lagoon. Not rough waves with the tide coming in. Believe me, I checked. I don't want to meet another one. Zahn paused. But sharks feed at night and I don't have my shark shield on. I swear that tiger shark's still hanging around, looking for a way back into the lagoon. Race you to shore? Tiger sharks? Fuck yeah. You're on. But as Zahn pulled ahead, Jason didn't have the heart to try and beat her. He'd kissed her. He'd fucking kissed her. And for a moment, one really long blissful moment, there'd been fireworks and lightning and toe curling and every fucking metaphor in the book. In the whole fucking library. He hadn't imagined it that first time, wishing her a happy new year after the cyclone. It wasn't the adrenaline-fueled we just survived certain death euphoria that he'd felt. It was full-blown love. For the one woman he couldn't have. Doomed love. Fuck. It was almost like some bitch was writing a book about them. One who hated his guts. What had he ever done to her? Well, no hoity-toity writer got to control his life. He'd take matters into his own hands. He waded out of the water to where Zahn already stood, dripping on the beach. Good thing the nights are warm and the water's warmer, he said. Come back to my place to dry off. Zahn shook her head. No, I'll head back to mine, thanks. Like you said, the night's warm. And all my clothes are there. She glanced down. Well, all except the shoe I lost in the water. Moonlight winked in the water droplets falling from her bare toes. Jason turned back to the sea. Want me to go get it? No. It's just a shoe. I'm sure I can get a new pair from Target in town tomorrow. Every girl he'd ever been with before had prided herself on her fashionable wardrobe. But Zahn? You seriously wore Target shoes to a celebrity wedding? Jason couldn't stop laughing. Zahn shrugged. Nobody noticed. Everyone's eyes were on the bride, like they're supposed to be. No one even glanced at the hotel manager, unless they needed something. I noticed, he corrected. I noticed the way that dress is the perfect color for you, showing off your curves without showing too much. The way the heels made your legs look longer, and you walked in them without tripping or stumbling, as if you were just as comfortable wearing those as the flat shoes you usually wear to work. You look beautiful tonight, Xanthi. And anyone who didn't notice is a fucking idiot. Zahn snorted. With one shoe and a soaking wet dress. That's one hell of a compliment, Jason. Thanks. Now I know you're drunk. And on that note, good night. She marched up the beach and the darkness swallowed her. Every instinct Jason had told him to follow her, but he knew she'd only kick him again. On purpose this time. Somehow he'd fucked up again and he didn't know how. With the one woman he couldn't afford to lose. Shouldn't have kissed her, he told himself, stumping along the sand to his villa. Shouldn't have had that dance and kissed her and… But fuck, it had been worth it. Fireworks and all. 47. Zahn was adrift in her dreams, feeling the blissful roll of a boat under her feet as she walked the deck of a yacht just like the one the Fishers owned. Instinctively she knew this was her home, though how she knew it she couldn't say. She called a name as she searched for someone, a vague sense of unease growing in the pit of her stomach. But there was no one else aboard. Laughter drifted up from the waves and Zahn turned to look. On the dive platform at the back of the boat sat a tiny toddler of indeterminate sex, dangling its feet in the water as the fish rose up to kiss the child's toes. Relief flooded through Zahn. This was the child she was searching for. Her child, though she had none. She climbed down the ladder, stretching her arms out. A pair of much larger arms lifted the kid up, pressing the toddler to her chest in a three-person hug. Warm lips melted against hers, giving and demanding in equal measure. Better than a book. Better than any book. I love you, Xanthi, Jason said before he kissed her again. Bloody hell. Zahn jolted awake. Thank all the gods and anyone else who was listening, she was home, alone in her bed, with no sign of Jason in the house. She still felt the heat of his lips on hers. Somehow, that kiss on the jetty was seared into her memory so deeply it had invaded her dreams. She should never have done it. Danced with him, kissed him, any of it. She needed to leave before she was tempted to do something stupid. Again. Time to travel. Time to go. Time to look for something new. She hadn't told him, but her citizenship papers had come through this week. She'd been too busy with the wedding to do more than glance at them, but she was free to leave the resort and take any job she wanted now. Zaan thought of her dream. It would be wonderful to feel a boat deck under her feet again. Diving expeditions didn't pay well, but she didn't need them to. It might take weeks or even months to find another job on a dive boat though. The summer was over and the wet season wasn't. Nowhere in Australia would be hiring right now. That headhunting hotel chain. If they still wanted her, she might be able to do their job for a little while until something better came up. If it was still available. It was 4 a.m, but Zaan itched for action, so she switched on her laptop and found the email. She read it through twice before typing a short reply. Yes, I'm interested. Can you give me further information about the position or the hotel? She hit send before she could reconsider. A request for information was hardly a signed contract, she told herself, as doubt crept in. She didn't want to leave Romance Island. She loved the place. She loved its owner, a man she couldn't have because he didn't love anyone but himself. That's why it was time for a new adventure. 48. A tentative knock on the door dragged Zaan's attention from the lagoon, where no naked rock star swam this morning. Maybe he'd slept in, after all the drinking and dancing last night. If she was lucky, he'd have forgotten all about their kiss. After waiting half an hour for a response that evidently wasn't coming, she'd switched off her laptop and stuffed it back in its bag. She'd check her email again later, but today she deserved a rest. The wedding had been hard work. She squeezed past the dining table and unlocked the door. Jason stood on the doormat, a strange intensity in his eyes that Zaan couldn't remember seeing before. I'm looking for the lady who owns this rather remarkable shoe, he said, holding out one of her heels from last night. Another line he'd stolen from a movie. Or a book. Zaan couldn't remember. Were all the charming things he said and did borrowed from the books he'd read? Maybe none of it was him at all. I don't have any use for a single shoe. I have 2 feet. That's why I brought them both. Jason pulled his other arm from behind his back, showing her the pair she'd worn yesterday. No wonder he hadn't been in the lagoon this morning. You went swimming for my other shoe. He grinned. Nah. The heel was caught in the jetty, like Cinderella was too busy fleeing the scene to free it before she took off. The other one was still on the beach where you'd left it too. So I figured I'd bring them back to you. Especially as neither of them is a Target shoe. He held them up so she could see the brand name clearly on the insole. Zaan sighed. No, they're not from Target. I bought them in Melbourne at one of those designer outlet places. They suited my dress, so I wore them. I didn't come here to talk about shoes, Xanthi. I'm here to talk about last night. Last night we danced and kissed and it was so potent it infused my dreams, Zaan thought but didn't say. Instead she said, What's to talk about? Your friend got married, we all drank too much, did things we regret and would like to forget, and now it's time to clean up the mess and go back to normal life. I should go see what the damage is to the new deck. You want to forget last night? Hurt hooded Jason's eyes. Of course I do. Don't you? Weddings are like fireworks. One night when everything seems to burn a bit brighter, but it's just an illusion. In daylight there's nothing there. Zaan forced herself to shrug. She couldn't look at him. One more moment of looking into those eyes and she'd give in and kiss him again. She had to get away from him. And the resort. But mostly from him. Bye, Jason. Thanks for the shoes. She pushed the door shut, then sank onto the sofa, her head in her hands. Only an idiot fell in love with her boss. Last night she'd become that idiot. But she wouldn't stay that way for long. She'd run far and fast, somewhere he wouldn't come searching for her. Because that was what Jason did, he just forgot about his girl of the moment and moved on to the next. He didn't chase girls. Didn't even ask them on a date. She'd be crazy to consider a relationship with him. That's why she was considering a job on the other side of the country instead. Much smarter. 49. Zan hoped the coffee she clutched to her chest would be what she needed to cure the worst case of Mondayism she'd ever known. She'd barely slept all weekend. Since she'd stupidly kissed her boss. She slammed the cup down on her desk and woke up her computer. Was it too soon to hope for a reply from Sydney? It was almost lunchtime over there now, and if they were really as eager as they'd said to have her manage their hotel. But the email hadn't sent yet, it was still sitting there in her outbox, waiting to go. What in hell? Communications were still down for that bloody wedding, Zan realized, closing her eyes. She'd have to call Villa Acoya and hope the honeymooners answered the phone. Like that would happen. But she'd agreed to keep the satellite dish switched off until the bride gave the all-clear. Now there was another stupid thing she'd done. She should have insisted the bride's father or someone else who wasn't engaged in a marathon sex orgy right now be able to call off the communications blackout. How could she possibly get any work done without internet and phones? She'd thought last week was bad. 5 minutes in and today was already shaping up to start the week from hell. "Good morning," an impossibly cheerful voice announced. Zan stared. What was the bride doing out of bed? Wasn't she on her honeymoon? The grinning girl in a singlet top and shorts didn't seem fazed by her silence. "I thought you'd like to know that my cousins flew out at dawn, so all your phones and internet should be working again. At least, that's what your IT department told me. You might want to follow up on that yourself, of course." Zan found her voice. "Thanks. I will. You'll probably be pleased to know that most of the wedding guests will be flying out today, so you'll only have Nathan and I here for the rest of the week. In case you want to reduce your staff numbers or anything," the girl continued. "Oh, but I'd appreciate if you kept the kitchen open. Damned if I'm cooking on my honeymoon." "All right," Zan ventured. She'd heard so many names for the bride that she wasn't sure which one to use anymore. It was like watching Kill Bill for the first time. Idly, she wondered if this girl owned a samurai sword. It wouldn't surprise her at all. "Thank you." The girl stuck out her hand. "Truly thank you. I know this wedding wasn't easy for you to host, but you've done a masterful job. Except for the hiccup with the fireworks, which I'm assured were entirely Jason's idea, everything ran almost perfectly. Both my cousins and my security consultant were impressed, and it takes a lot to do that. I'm sure they'll be recommending your hotel to other high-profile clients, so be prepared for more unusual bookings." "Don't touch her." Jason's warning rang in Zan's head, making her hesitate when normally she'd have shaken the girl's hand. Now she eyed the outstretched fingers, wondering whether the girl's other hand was wrapped around her hunting knife. The girl gave a little snort of laughter, her dark eyes reading Zan's soul, or so it seemed. "I'm unarmed today. There's no threat on your island. I need a knife for now, or so my security assures me." Her hand felt so delicate in Zan's, though Zan's hands were hardly huge. Zan was scared to exert too much pressure or she might crush the delicate bones. "Good to know, Doctor," Zan managed to say. "You can call me Caitlin. My friends and family do." Zan nodded. She doubted she'd see the girl again after this week, but it was nice to put a name to her. "And this is yours." A more material thank you than words can convey. Caitlin lifted a gift bag onto the desk. One of the big expensive ones from the Pearl Farm. "I can't accept this," Zan insisted, pushing the bag away. "Of course you can." Caitlin's eyes darkened as her voice hardened. "The rest of your staff will receive cash bonuses as a token of my thanks, but Joe and Jason insisted you wouldn't accept money, even though you did more than anyone else. Jason said he'd take you into a jeweler's to find something suitable that you would accept." Her voice turned more frightening still. "If he's lied to me and you don't like it, let me know. I'll write you a check for the value so you can spend the money on something you do like." Great. If she didn't like it, Jason would be in trouble. I'm sure I'll love it, Zahn said hastily, racking her brain to work out when she'd ever been in a jeweler's shop with Jason and what she'd seen that she liked. She stifled a gasp as she realized there was only one item Jason had ever seen her admire. The ring. Gold and coral and pearls like something plucked from the lagoon. Holding her breath, Zahn peered into the bag. No, the box was much too big to be the ring. Surely they hadn't bought her a string of pearls? Those things cost a fortune. She couldn't accept a gift like that. She withdrew the box, closing her eyes as she opened it. She had to find a diplomatic way of refusing the girl's gift, without getting Jason killed or maimed or whatever Caitlin had threatened him with. It's certainly unusual, but I like it, Caitlin commented. Pearl strands weren't unusual. Zahn's eyes snapped open. Her jaw dropped too. Wow. Not the ring. This made the ring pale into insignificance. The necklace glowed in pale gold, shaped into delicate coral strands much like the ring or the bombies in the lagoon. Where the ring had only one pearl, this had more than a dozen, set among the coral like the jewels they were. The earrings were smaller versions of the ring, inset with pearls like the necklace. It's beautiful, Zahn breathed, wanting to touch it but not sure if she should. Her hand hovered over the masterpiece of jewel crafting that she'd never seen in the Pearl Farm's showroom. So you like it then? Caitlin asked. Not sure of her voice, Zahn nodded. Good. That's settled then. Now, another matter. Caitlin crossed the room and closed the door, before returning to perch on the client's seat across from Zahn. While I understand your hotel has a reputation for respecting guest privacy, what I'm about to say now cannot leave this room. Do you understand? Zahn wet her lips. Will I get to leave this room? Caitlin laughed. Yes. But if you ever repeat what I tell you, you may wish you hadn't. Because you'll have to kill me? Zahn quipped. Caitlin shook her head. Oh, not me. You're not a threat to me, and I'd hate to see someone who Jason cares about so deeply hurt for being careless. My past is bigger than just me, and others who are involved are more risk-averse than I am. Zahn put the vague statements together. You're about to tell me things that could get me killed, if other people know I know them. Perhaps. I suspect Jason has told you enough misinformation to place you in danger anyway, though. Allow me to set the record straight? Surreal. Like something out of a spy movie. Yet Zahn found herself nodding. If she was in danger already, what did she have to lose? First, remove your wristband. There will be no recording of this conversation, Caitlin instructed. She took both her and Zahn's ID bands and shut them in the bottom drawer of Zahn's filing cabinet. Then she returned to her seat and said, I saw you watching us on our wedding night. During the fireworks. I did, Zahn admitted, not sure what else to say. What did you see? Caitlin inquired. He didn't know. Jason thought he was doing you a favor because you liked fireworks. He had no idea what effect it would have on your husband. Zahn took a deep breath. Honestly. He was gutted that you didn't like them. Caitlin blinked, her face blank, not giving anything away. I meant when you looked at us, not Jason. Zahn closed her eyes, trying to remember the scene. Before champagne had clouded her judgment. I saw you both startle as the first fireworks went off. Then he pushed you to the ground and shielded your body with his until you managed to persuade him to get off you. Caitlin nodded slowly. Accurate, or mostly. Do you know why he did it? Post-traumatic stress disorder, I imagine, from some violence in his past. Does he do that often? Throw me to the ground? No. This was the second time. Caitlin closed her eyes. The first time he took a bullet for me. Wait, what? The words must have been written on Zahn's face, because she didn't need to voice them before the girl continued. Nathan and I have a shared, violent past. One where we both have blood on our hands. Him more than me, but only because he got there first. Did Jason tell you that I'm a killer? Zahn nodded. Why lie? He's right, though he knows nothing about it. About me or Nathan. Did he call Nathan a psycho? Yes, Zahn whispered. Caitlin's husband wasn't psychologically sound. Even Zahn could see that. Caitlin nodded grimly. He wouldn't dare say it in front of me. Not anymore. I know Nathan's not perfect, but then, neither am I. So on Saturday, when you watched two damaged people commit their lives to one another, were you envisioning our end? I did consider offering you a card for the National Domestic Violence Hotline, Zahn admitted. I still think. You're wrong, Caitlin interrupted. I'm not like Fung, Jason's mail-order bride. If Nathan ever tries to hurt me, he won't survive the day. Wait. You know about Fung? Jason swore everyone to secrecy, that we wouldn't mention a word to you. Caitlin shrugged. Of course I know. About her and all his girls. The names of every staff member who lost her job here because of him. The maid, the mail-order bride, the virgin, the heiress, and every reality TV starlet he slept with along the way. Fung's husband was a real piece of work, by the way. He deserved to die far more painfully than he did. He's dead? Zahn blurted out. But I thought. She stared at Caitlin. A killer, she'd said. But. Caitlin smiled. Sharks looked friendlier. Men who abuse women don't live long around me. Zahn swallowed. She didn't think she was getting out of this room alive. No wonder Jason was scared of this girl. So what's your husband's life expectancy then? Hopefully another 50 years or more. When we're both old and grey and have to keep our weapons strapped to our walking frames. Suddenly Caitlin looked like a bride again, smiling radiantly like a normal newlywed. Nathan will never hurt me. I know that for certain. Said every domestic violence victim ever, Zahn thought but didn't say. Caitlin seemed to read her mind anyway. Sometimes life has moments you can't afford to forget. Now most men, if someone held a gun to their heads and told them that they had to hurt someone or they'd die, most men would consider it. Some would do it. How many men you know would risk their lives for you? Jason, Zahn thought. First in the fire. Then during the cyclone. And again with the jellyfish, and this girl. None, right? Caitlin continued, as if she hadn't expected Zahn to answer. Nathan saved my life, though he didn't expect to survive. And he's done it more than once. When life gives you a man who loves you and truly would die for you, you don't ask for perfection. You take that gift however he comes and you hold on to him. Help his scars to heal because he's worth spending the rest of your life with. Whatever the future holds. Worth spending the rest of your life with. No need for perfection. Hold on to him. Not throw his peace offering back in his face. Then I wish you all the best for your future together, Zahn said hoarsely. Thank you, Caitlin replied and left, shutting the door behind her. Zahn buried her face in her hands. Jason. How had she been so blind? Had he seriously considered her as more than a knight's conquest all this time? If so, she'd screwed up so royally she could never look him in the eye again. Bloody hell. 50. Jason pushed himself to swim twice the length of the lagoon that morning, same as yesterday. He was angry, he was frustrated, he was fucking pissed off at himself for fucking up so royally after the wedding, and worst of all, Zahn hadn't been watching him swim from her kitchen window like she did every morning. Every morning until the morning after he fucked up, that is. Now it was 2 days in a row he hadn't seen her. Where was the point in having your own private island with a lagoon you could swim naked in every morning, if the one woman you wanted to admire your ass as you swam past wasn't looking? It was enough to make him stop swimming altogether. Or to wear something while he did it. Or maybe it was time to leave the island for a while and go to the East Coast while he was recording the album. Find replacement band members over there. Do a few shows, then maybe head overseas. Angel had never wanted to tour much, so they hadn't. Funny that the songwriter and guitarist could call the shots for the whole band. But she could, and she had. That was something else he'd need, a songwriter. Everything he'd tried to write the last few months was shit. Especially that song he'd given up on that night of the wedding. Definitely not good enough to play in public. Maybe he should try asking her one more time while she was still basking in her honeymoon glow. Or maybe not, seeing as the last time they'd spoken had been at the wedding reception, with fireworks exploding overhead as she told him exactly how many seconds he had to get out of her sight before she rendered him incapable of fathering children. Fireworks were what had fucked up his night. First the ones in the sky, then the ones with Zahn. Should never have kissed her. Why is your hotel manager looking for jobs on the other side of the country? A voice inquired. No, Caitlin. That's what she wanted to be called now, after so long as Angel. She sat on his veranda, enthroned on one of his outdoor chairs. Normally, he'd be worried about her cutting bits off, especially after what she'd said the other night, but the thought of losing Zahn stopped him dead. Bullshit. We pay her plenty here. Jason wished his voice didn't sound so weak. Her eyes filled with pity. She has a job interview next week in Sydney. I saw it in her email inbox when I dropped off her gift. She liked it, by the way. Who cared about the necklace and earrings if Zahn was leaving? What did you do? Caitlin asked softly. I kissed her, Jason snapped. On the night of your wedding, I kissed her. Must have been a really awful kiss if that's why she's leaving. It fucking wasn't, okay? It was an awesome kiss. So awesome we fell into the water. And now she doesn't want to talk to me. Even look at me. Jason stomped up the steps to the door. Aren't you just the bad news fairy? First the band's breaking up, then you're engaged to Dr. Crazy Pants who tried to break my face the day we met, and now Zahn's leaving. Fan-fucking-tastic. He swiped open his front door and strode inside. Caitlin followed him. So you're just going to let her go? Not fight for her? You think I should turn all crazy stalker and follow her? That's rich coming from you. Jason refused to look at her. Fuck, of course he wanted to fight for her. Run up to her office right now and beg her not to go. Of course not. There's a big difference between stalking a girl and asking her on a date, or for something more. You hounded me for years, but you were never a stalker. No, I paid someone more qualified to follow you around and keep you safe. Or so I thought. That's what you want me to say, isn't it? That I'm sorry I fucked up? Then with the security guard, and now with the fireworks? I'm sorry, all right? I fuck up. I'm human. Not as perfect as you. Or Xanthi. Jason wished she'd leave him alone to his misery, but he didn't dare say so. Why aren't you enjoying your honeymoon bliss with your new husband? Doesn't he have the stamina to satisfy you? Caitlin laughed. There's nothing wrong with his stamina. His family fly home tomorrow, so he's taken the helicopter to town to do some sightseeing with them. And his little sister, well, you know how much you hate Nathan? She likes me a lot less than that. Staring at the girl he'd fallen in love with about the time he'd learned to read, Jason found that hard to believe. Everyone fell for Caitlin. It was something about the big eyes and how delicate she looked that somewhere in between you just couldn't help yourself. Anyway, don't change the subject. We're talking about Xanthi Lane, hotel manager extraordinaire. When I treated her in March, she definitely meant something to you. And you've kissed her what? Once? 3 times, Jason admitted grudgingly. 3 kisses then. Why haven't you slept with this girl? He couldn't lie to her. She probably already knew anyway. Because the day I met her, she said if I ever propositioned her again, she'd take me to court for sexual harassment. And she threw a bucket of water over me. I was hungover as all hell from the night before and in no state for anything, but I do remember that. Caitlin laughed. I like her. So do I. So you've never asked her again? Caitlin pressed. No way was he telling her he'd proposed to Zahn in hospital. No. Because no means no, right? You taught me that. Yeah, but no, a year ago to a stranger lying in a pool of his own vomit is different to if you asked her now. You know, sober and clean and not really a stranger anymore. Jason frowned. I don't want a one-night stand with Zahn. Not anymore. No, Caitlin said thoughtfully. I guess you don't. So offer her something you do want to share with her instead. And if she says no? Caitlin shrugged. Don't ask her until you've given her a bloody good reason to say yes. But ask her. Tell her how you feel. Don't just let her walk away without trying something. Nathan and we walked away from us without saying everything that needed to be said. It cost us 6 years. 6 years I'd take back in a heartbeat if I could, no matter what we did in that time. Nothing can make up for lost time. Jason's heart froze. You'd have given up all of Chaya for him? Caitlin squeezed her eyes shut. To save him from the pain of those years, yes. Oh, that reminds me. I didn't just have a thank you gift for Zahn. I have one for you too. She pulled a USB drive out of her pocket and held it out. Joe said you're considering signing a new contract. A comeback tour with a new band to front if need be. I want you to know that I'm happy to sign over the rights to the band name, just like Joe will. You can call it Chaya if you want. And if you do, that drive has every unreleased song I've ever written on it. Some are pretty rough, but that should keep you going for the next decade or so. Jason closed his fingers around the drive. Such a tiny thing could ensure his rock stardom for the foreseeable future. Caitlin as Angel was always the heart of the band. Are you sure I can't persuade you to? Caitlin shook her head. No, my performing days are over. But if you decide to record any of those, I wouldn't say no to a royalty share. Worth it at twice the price. Of course. Thank you. She patted his shoulder. Good luck, Jason. Now I'm settled, I'd like to see you and Joe happy too. I'm not marrying her. Jason squawked in mock horror. She's my sister. With a wave goodbye, Caitlin left. So, a trip to Sydney was in order. He could do that. A few phone calls and he'd have accommodation and flight sorted, no worries. Maybe Caitlin was right. What did he have to lose? Only Zahn. And there was no fucking way he wanted that. If any woman was worth fighting for, it was Xanthi Lane. 51. As she climbed into the helicopter, Zahn congratulated herself on managing to avoid Jason all week. It had meant spending more time at home and less in the lagoon, but she had been busy preparing for this interview. All her citizenship papers were in order, so she was allowed to stay in Australia no matter what job she held now, no being tied to the resort. Or the too tempting man who owned the place. Admittedly, she hadn't managed to avoid the honeymoon couple, who spent an unusual amount of time outside their bedroom together. They couldn't keep their hands off each other, but it wasn't in that get-a-room way other honeymooners did it. Maybe things were different when the girl was as hands-off as Caitlin. The honeymoon was over though. The couple had flown home yesterday, laden with their luggage and a pile of wedding gifts. Zahn's only luggage was a carry-on case, containing a couple of interview suits and a dress. She figured she'd spend a day shopping in Sydney, taking advantage of the number of stores that the tiny town of Broome just didn't have. Maybe even splash out on a new pair of shoes. She'd need them if she worked in Sydney. No more resort-style clothing for work. It would be formal suits every day. What are we waiting for? She asked Cho. Another passenger, he replied. Zahn's heart sank as the door cracked open. Jason stood framed in the doorway, an uncertain smile on his face before he climbed into the seat beside her. Where are you headed? She asked before he could question her. I have to discuss terms and sign some contracts with my agent. We need to work out the schedule for recording the next album and touring afterwards. Jason reclined in his seat, folding his arms behind his head. Fuck, it'll be good to be back behind the mic again. How long will you be gone? As long as it takes, I guess, Jason replied. Can't rush these things. And on tour, everyone wants a concert or two. Can't disappoint the fans. Zaan breathed a sigh of relief. If this interview went badly, then she might have a reprieve at the resort for a while, if Jason was away. She'd still look for another position, but she wouldn't be under as much pressure to get away from him. Show fired up the rotors then, making the cabin too noisy for talk. Jason put his headphones on, but Zaan left hers on the seat, not wanting to hear any more. Instead, she contented herself with the view out the window. This might be one of her last opportunities to see the Kimberley laid out below her. Funny to think of all that red rock as home. Not to mention she'd missed the opportunity for daily snorkeling. After just a week out of the lagoon, she was already missing her afternoon swim with the local wildlife. Maybe she was being too quick, taking the first job offer she'd seen. Sydney had never been her scene. She'd have been better off waiting for a position on another island resort, maybe on the Great Barrier Reef or somewhere in the South Pacific. Or even Mauritius. No, she didn't speak French, so Mauritius was out. She risked a glance at Jason. He was just enjoying the ride, as usual. Was there anything about life that could upset the man for long? A week ago, he'd been as down and depressed as a man could be, as he watched the girl he loved marry another man. Now he looked like he was planning mischief. Knowing Jason, he probably was. Thankfully, she'd be too far away to deal with it until she got home. All too soon, the helicopter circled into land. Moments later, a familiar jet with a kangaroo adorning its red tail dropped onto the runway. Zaan's plane to Sydney. She bade the boys a curt goodbye and headed for the main terminal building, wheeling her case behind her. Zaan waited patiently in line to pick up her boarding pass, trying not to look impatient as the family with far too many suitcases in front of her took forever, dragging their luggage to the counter. One of the check-in staff signaled to Zaan that she was free, so Zaan strode to the counter, holding out her passport. "Flying to Sydney?" the woman asked. "Yes," Zaan replied. "Luggage?" "Just my carry-on." The woman nodded, her red and white striped nails ticking on the keyboard. Zaan wondered who did manicures like that. Surely painting all those little lines took forever, and what if you chipped one? If the woman did them herself, she must have the patience of a saint. Or perhaps nail art was her thing, her mindfulness exercise, for when her job got too boring or too stressful or… The last voice in the world Zaan wanted to hear said, "You've given her the wrong seat." Jason tapped Zaan's boarding pass. "This says economy class. My staff fly business or first." The woman looked flustered. "But she's only paid for…" Jason produced a credit card. "Fix it please." Zaan felt her face grow hot. "It's fine. I'm not flying for business. This is a personal trip." "Doesn't matter. You're the manager of a high-class resort. It's a matter of reputation." Jason shoved the credit card at the woman. "I can't allow you to fly economy. If it bothers you, you should find a job managing a less exclusive hotel." If anything, Zaan's blush deepened. He couldn't possibly know about her job interview. He couldn't. "Fine," she muttered, taking the new boarding pass and heading for the security scanning station. He couldn't follow her through there. She stuck her laptop in one of the plastic trays and pushed her bag with it toward the conveyor belt. Behind her, a wallet and phone thumped into another tray, alongside a handful of tinkling keys. Why was Jason following her? "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Emptying my pockets to go through security or they won't let me fly," Jason replied, stepping through the scanner. The bastard didn't even beep. He shoved his belongings into his pockets before they'd even scanned her bag. "You're not flying anywhere. You don't have any luggage," Zaan said, ripping open her bag so she could dump her laptop inside. Jason shrugged. "Don't need it. I have plenty of clothes at my place. Just need the keys." He dangled them from one finger. For a moment, Zaan had forgotten that Jason owned more properties than just the resort. To be fair, she hadn't really thought about it before, but it made sense. He probably had a place in every major city he visited often. A beachfront villa in Queensland, something overlooking Sydney Harbour, an inner-city bachelor pad in Melbourne, a penthouse in Peppermint Grove in Perth. But they couldn't compare to the resort, or he'd be living at one of them. Romance Island was the best. Or it would be, if she didn't have to share it with him. She could barely look at him now without thinking of his searing kisses on the jetty, how they danced, and how she dreamed. That's why she had to leave. To take this job, wherever and whatever it entailed. Zahn headed straight for the bar. "Where are you going?" Jason asked. "I need a drink." Jason jerked his head. "But the business lounge is that way. I'd take you as my guest, but I don't need to. Your ticket is invitation enough." For the first time, Zahn glanced at her boarding pass. Business class, not first. Not that she'd complain. "Where is it?" Jason lifted his chin, eyeing what Zahn thought was the airport control tower. "Up there." He wove through the crowd, headed for the stairs at the base of the tower. It wasn't until they reached it that Zahn noticed the sign pointing the way up to the business lounge. The rockstar was right. 52. She managed to avoid him during the flight, as her seat was on the other side of the business class cabin to his, but he found her again at Sydney Airport while she was trying to get a taxi. "I have a car, and I can give you a lift to your accommodation if you like." Zahn shook her head. "I've seen you drive. You might have your license back, but I'm not getting into a car with you. I remember what happened last time." He actually laughed. "It's not bushfire season anymore. And I mean, I have a car with a driver. My car's in my garage here." "I'm sure you're not going anywhere near where I'm going," Zahn said, hoping to discourage him. "Where are you staying?" She didn't remember. Somewhere cheap she'd booked at the last minute, not far from where her interview would be held. "Somewhere in the CBD," she said, knowing it was a nightmare to drive through. "Perfect. My place is in Kent Street." "Bugger. You know, you could just save your money and stay with me. I doubt any city hotel can beat my place," Jason continued. She could imagine. "Let me guess. A penthouse with views over Sydney Harbour?" His brow wrinkled. "You've seen it?" Zahn laughed. "No, just a good guess. This isn't my first time in Sydney." "What are you doing here?" Such an innocent question, but Zahn didn't want to answer it. "Some shopping, maybe meet up with a few people. I just wanted a break. Something different, after all the worries of that wedding." "My place would be perfect for that. Close to everything, really. I won't be home much either. I'm here to meet with my agent and the record company." "So you're really doing it? Going back to the rockstar life?" Jason frowned. "I guess so. Yeah. Our car's waiting. You coming or not?" The taxi drivers didn't seem to want to know her, so Zahn grumpily agreed. She sat in the back seat in silence while Jason chatted with the driver all the way into town. There hadn't been many accommodation options for her, what with so many conferences on this week, and the short notice. If she'd known, she would have accepted the initial offer of a hotel room in the place she was being asked to manage, but she turned it down, thinking to take a few extra days to make it a proper break, just like she'd told Jason. It didn't help that the only direct flights between Broome and Sydney ran twice a week, so she'd be here almost a week, whether she liked it or not. That didn't come cheap. For a moment, she wished she could take Jason up on his offer of a place to stay, but it just wouldn't be right. "Zahn?" Zahn looked up to find both the driver and Jason staring at her. "What?" "I said, would you like to at least see my place, so if your accommodation isn't as nice as you expect, you'll know what your other options are?" Jason said patiently. "Sure." The word was out of her mouth before she'd really thought it through, and then it was too late. Jason grabbed her case and she followed him out onto the footpath. The car sped off and out of sight before Zahn could change her mind. "So you're coming up?" Jason asked eagerly. As long as you don't want me to see your etchings or whatever, yes, Zahn said. Etchings? It took Jason a moment, then he burst out laughing. He was still laughing as he led the way through the lobby and into the lifts. He swiped his pass card, keyed in a pin and pressed the button for the 22nd floor. Nah, I don't do those. Give me some credit, Zahn. I don't deal in euphemisms. I'm offering you a place to stay. As a friend, because I figure that's what we are. There was a challenge in that last bit. One Zahn felt compelled to answer. I'm here for a job interview, Zahn blurted out. You're my boss. I can't stay with you while I'm trying to find another job. There. She waited for her words to hurt him. He shrugged. I'm not your boss. I just own the island where you work. In case you've forgotten, you're the one in charge of the island, not me. And you do what you have to do. The room's still yours if you want it. At least wait until you've seen it. The doors dinged open, so Zahn followed Jason to his door. Not quite the penthouse, as there were several other apartments on his floor, but they weren't set that close together. Jason unlocked the door and let Zahn enter first. It didn't look much different to Villa Penguin, really. Roughly the same size, though a lot higher up. Here. This is the best view, Jason said, beckoning her through the dining room. Zahn couldn't keep the smile off her face as she beheld the promised harbor views, from the balcony no less. Wherever she'd booked wouldn't have a view like this. The bedrooms are through this way. Mine's the first one, but there's 2 other guest rooms plus a bathroom I don't use, so you'd have it to yourself. You can take your pick. Zahn peeked into Jason's bedroom, which looked about as lived-in as a hotel room, but then, so did both of the guest rooms. You aren't here very often, are you? I like my island better. I stayed here whenever we did stuff in Sydney. Concerts. Recording in a studio. Some of the media interviews. New Year. He ventured a smile. I used to spend every New Year's Eve in Sydney for the fireworks and concerts and stuff. You want to know my best New Year's ever? Probably headlining a concert in the Opera House, followed by fireworks and a night filled with fangirls. Probably not. You were there. Cyclone Rose, blue cheese gnocchi and Xanthi in a boat by my side. I'll never tell anyone else that because I promised you I wouldn't, but it was a new year to remember, right? Yes. Yes it was, Zahn said, her eyes darting from one guest room to the other. She wanted the one with the balcony. Even if it was next door to Jason, it was a million times better than the shabby-looking hotel room she'd booked. But she was trying to distance herself from him, not further their friendship. Damn it, if she shared a house with him, she'd kiss him again for sure. Jason closed his eyes. Look, I told you then that deciding to go back to music, especially with a solo career, is a big thing for me. Fucking scary, really. It'd be really great to be able to share that with someone. Someone I can talk to about it, so I don't do anything stupid. Zahn swallowed. Anyone else, she'd have agreed to help. Damn it, she wanted to help him so much. Instead she forced herself to say, but what if I come back from my interview thrilled because I got the job and I want to celebrate? His eyes met hers. Then we get some fucking champagne and celebrate if that's what you want. He meant it. He really meant it. We'll already have plenty of bugger the whole world bourbon in the house for bad news. Zahn couldn't help it. She laughed. When did you hear me call it that? One of the nights we spent talking on the Penguin jetty. Probably with a bottle of bourbon, Jason admitted. Please stay. It's fucking lonely here by myself. I'll even make you pancakes. Those warm honey eyes had won her over, and she knew it. You don't know how to make pancakes. Fuck, you're right. Maybe I'll buy a cookbook or something so I can learn. Zahn just shook her head. All right. I'll stay. He hugged her. You're a fucking legend, Xanthi. Thank you. This time, she didn't push him away. She'd have to do that for good soon enough. 53. Are you an Australian citizen? What do you think is the biggest challenge facing the hotel industry today? What's your view on diversity in the workplace? And so it went until Zaan was sick of answering questions. Job interviews weren't the worst thing in the world, and she'd done enough of them to be good at them, but she'd never liked them. This time though, she was the only candidate, and she knew it. Which meant that while she was trudging back to Jason's apartment exhausted by the interrogation, they called her to offer her the job. Wary of being duped like Maya had managed to, she asked for them to send her contract and job description through for her to peruse at her leisure. She also asked for a tour of the hotel they wanted her to handle before she gave them her answer. The documents were emailed through almost instantly, while the tour was arranged for the following day. Zaan found herself almost breathless at their efficiency. So different to the laid-back resort life in Broome. Was she even up to that kind of pressure? She wasn't sure, and the next morning didn't offer her any answers either. It was a lovely hotel, but it was a lot like the apartment block where Jason lived. Big apartments with grand views of the city and the harbour, but not much else. It didn't have any of the unique attributes that made Romance Island Resort pretty much sell itself as an ideal holiday destination. The tropical aquarium in the lobby only made her homesick. In fact, when she returned to Jason's apartment that afternoon, she was determined to find somewhere to snorkel, even if the weather wasn't looking good. All she needed was a wetsuit and she'd be fine. Except Jason had arrived home early too. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Great. So you got the job?" Zaan took a deep breath. "They offered it to me. I have until the end of the week to make a decision." "What do you want to do?" "Go snorkeling," she answered. When he looked stunned, she explained, "I always feel better after a swim with some fish. With snorkeling, I don't have to worry about dive tables or tanks or anything. It's just me and the fish." "You want to go out in that?" Jason pointed out the west-facing window, where storm clouds massed, waiting to attack the city. "It's all water," she replied, though the sensible part of her balked at the thought of swimming in a storm. "Give me half an hour and I'll see if I can sort something for you," he said. As if rock stars had the power to call off storms, Zaan thought, grabbing a bottle of juice from the fridge to take to her room. At least she'd brought a book to read while she waited. Within 20 minutes, Jason stood in the doorway to her room, almost bouncing in excitement. "I got you a sheltered snorkeling spot. We've only got half an hour, but the visibility's better than anywhere else, and there aren't any jellyfish." Of course. He would check for jellyfish, even if Zaan knew box jellyfish didn't come this far south. "I'd like to come too if you don't mind." How could she say no? "Let's go then." Jason led the way toward Darling Harbour, mystifying Zaan even further. It wasn't until he walked into the aquarium building that she understood. "You figured taking me to the aquarium would let me spend some time with fish? That's sweet, Jason, but it's not quite the same. Walking through glass tunnels isn't sharing the ocean with them. It's—" He grinned. "We're getting in. In the tank, with the fish and the sharks and stuff." It was the best she could expect, if she decided to move to Sydney this winter. All the ocean snorkeling spots wouldn't be warm enough until spring. But for half an hour, she forgot all about buildings and hotels and everything else, while she swam through the aquarium with Jason. Later, when they dried off and dressed and were watching the dugongs through the glass, she thanked him. "Any time," Jason replied, and Zaan's heart sank once more. Every moment she spent with him, she wanted more, but she knew she couldn't have it. It was better this way. 54. On their way back to the apartment, they ordered pizza. While they waited for it to be delivered, Jason offered to open a bottle of champagne to celebrate her new job. "I haven't accepted it yet," Zaan protested. "Job offer then," he said, popping open the bottle and pouring her a glass anyway. They drank it in the living room, watching the storm clouds roll in from the west, glad to be in, out of the rain. The wind speeds of this storm matched those of a Category 1 cyclone back on the island, so Zaan was doubly pleased she hadn't gone swimming at the beach in this weather. The pizza arrived, smelling so good that Zan stuffed half a piece in her mouth before she'd even found a plate to put it on. Jason just laughed at her, helping himself to a slice. "I saw you wore the necklace Caitlin gave you to your job interview yesterday," Jason said between bites. "So you really do like it then?" "It's beautiful," Zan replied. "I'd hate to think how much it cost, but she wouldn't take no for an answer, so I had to accept it. I figured now I have it, I may as well wear it." It had felt like a piece of home around her neck all through the interview. They chewed in silence for a while until they'd finished the pizza between them. Jason headed to the kitchen to wash his hands. "I have something else you might like," he said. He dried his hands on the tea towel and disappeared down the passage to the bedrooms. Restless, Zan got up and washed her hands too, but she couldn't seem to sit down again. She knew she had to make a decision. If only Jason could have stayed an asshole. If only the Sydney hotel had a tank big enough for her to snorkel in every day. If only she hadn't fallen in love with Jason, slipping deeper every moment she spent with him. He truly would do anything for her, wouldn't he? "Please don't leave." Zan turned to find Jason staring at her. "I wasn't. I just got up to stretch my legs." Too late she realized she'd been pacing in front of the door. "I know I'm going to fuck this up, but can you promise to hear me out, and if you're going to leave, please don't do it until tomorrow?" Now he wanted a promise? "I already said I'm not leaving." He wet his lips. Swallowed. Wet his lips again. "Okay? I want to ask, have wanted for a while now, I don't want to lose you. Please Zan, will you marry me?" Zan's breath caught in her throat. It was her turn to stare, to see if he was serious. It truly looked like he was. "This is because of the job, isn't it? You don't want to lose me as your hotel manager." Jason snorted. "Right now, I don't give a fuck about the hotel. All I can think about is you." "Why?" was all she could say. He dragged his fingers through his hair. "Because you're incredible. Awesome. The one perfect woman for me. The one I'd do anything for. The one who makes me want to do heroic things instead of just fucking up all the time. Because I don't know what I'd do without you. If I lost you. Because I love you." Zan's mouth turned desert dry. "I bet you say that to all the girls." He shook his head slowly. "Nope. No one. Not until you. I swear, Xanthi. You're the only woman I've ever truly loved. You're my boss." He shook his head again. "I'm not. Never have been. The boss of Romance Island Resort is you, since the day you arrived. If I want to stay at the resort, I have to do what you say, and I have. Mostly. Except when it came to putting pants on. What if I want to leave the resort to take the job here? What if I want to travel?" Zan persisted. "Then I'll come with you. Wherever you want to go. I can record music anywhere, give concerts anywhere. You can come on tour if you want, or we can plan a tour to all the places you want to go. Whatever you want, Xanthi, I'll give it to you. Just say you'll be mine." He dropped to his knees and flipped open the ring box. "Marry me, Xanthi. Please?" Somewhere between the way his voice caressed her name and the way his honey-colored eyes lured her in, Zan's heart melted. He loved her. He wanted her. He was the one man who'd do anything for her, who she'd be crazy to let go. Who cared if he owned the resort? He wasn't really her boss. Nothing else mattered but him and her and love. Tears sprang to her eyes. "I will." He leaped to his feet. "You will?" "Yes. I will." "Thank fuck for that." Zan's laughter died in her throat as he kissed her, just like on the night of Caitlin's wedding. And maybe there were fireworks or thunderstorms or curling toes and clenching cores. She didn't care, because right now she was kissing Jason and he was kissing her, and no romance book could compare or even describe it, because this was real and theirs and no one else could share it. 55. The next morning, Zan woke alone in her bed, her lips tender from so many kisses the night before. Her memories were perfectly clear, though they felt like a dream. Last night Jason had asked her to marry him, and she'd agreed. That was all he'd asked though, which was why she'd slept in the guest room. After lying awake half the night, second-guessing herself of course. No wonder her dreams had been filled with him, some of them erotic enough to make her blush when she saw him next. It hadn't been like that with Jerome of course. The night she'd said she wanted to travel the world while he finished his studies, he'd demanded that he agree to marry her, so she'd come back. Then he'd insisted they have sex to seal the deal. That hadn't been anything to write a book about. A few minutes of fumbling in the back seat of his car with her head against one door and her knees hiked up to give him room to move, before he'd groaned, stilled and then thrown the used condom out the window. Sex with Jerome had felt like a chore. What would it be like with Jason? Like something out of her dreams, a reenactment of every steamy romance book he'd read? He'd mentioned some sort of tantric sex course he'd done, which meant he had to know more than just the theory of what goes where. He'd definitely had enough practice, even during the time Zan had known him. She headed for the kitchen and coffee, hoping for a few minutes to straighten her head out before she had to face Jason. Zan drained her cup, but her thoughts were still tangled. She wasn't sure how she could go back to the resort and tell everyone she and Jason were now together. The ring still sat in its box on the dining table, she'd shied away from wearing it. Now, with no one watching, she pulled it out and slipped it onto her fourth finger. As luck would have it, it fitted her perfectly. Zan stared at the ring, the gold reflecting the sun streaming through the window as the pearl glowed with hidden secrets, including the biggest one of all. Jason loved her, had asked to marry her, and she'd said yes. She didn't want it to be a secret. She wanted someone to shout it from the rooftops until the whole world knew, because that would make this all the more real. "Good morning." "It suits you," Jason said, bending down for a kiss. Yes, it did. But it didn't feel right to wear it yet. A ring this grand screamed of victory, of love so firmly established that no one could tear them apart. A marriage of souls as well as hearts. It wasn't an engagement ring. It was a wedding ring. At the thought of planning another celebrity wedding, even her own, Zan's heart sank. All the security and the stress and the planning for a single day? "I don't want a big wedding," she said, slipping off the ring to nestle it back in its box. "I always liked the stories where the couple eloped to Las Vegas and just did it." Jason nodded. "Definitely a rock star thing to do. When do you want to go to Vegas?" Flummoxed, Zan floundered for a bit. "I don't want to go to America. If there was a way to do it here and now, I would. It's just a long engagement when I could be here while you're off recording or touring or whatever, or if I'm at the island, would you forget about me like all the other girls? Would you spend every night with fangirls again like you used to? Jerome cheated on me with a teenager. I don't think I could forgive you if you did the same. Xanthi, all I want is you. I don't need any fangirls, not if I have you. Besides, you'll be with me if you want. Fuck, I'll find a way for us to get married today, if that's what you want. If we wait too long, I'm scared I'll back out or get cold feet or realize just how crazy this is, me marrying a rock star. It doesn't feel real yet." Zan couldn't seem to find the right words. What was she saying? She never second-guessed her decisions. It's time for a new adventure. I want to sign something. I want to do something. Today. Jason nodded like he understood. I'll make it real. Today or tomorrow. Before we leave anyway. We'll sign the papers and say the words and it'll be yours, Xanthi. Officially. He swallowed and flashed a shy smile. And you'll be mine. Yes. 56. And that's how, at 4 o'clock that afternoon, Xanthi Lane stood beside Jason Felix in the waiting room of the registry office. She wore a new dress she'd bought only that morning, a summery-style fit for a garden party in shades of violet, lavender and white. When Jason had seen her cutting off the tags, he'd laughed and brought out a shirt that matched the violet perfectly. He wore it now, fiddling with the buttons on the cuffs like he wasn't used to wearing long sleeves. And he wasn't. It was novel to see him wearing a shirt at all. The receptionist called their names and Zahn's knees went weak. She was going to do this. She was going to marry the man she loved, who loved her. "I hate Sydney traffic," grumbled a familiar voice. Zahn spun to find Joe and Angel Caitlin in the room with them. She stared at Jason. "I called them," he said sheepishly, staring at his feet. "We're supposed to have 2 witnesses and I thought it'd be nicer to have people we know instead of strangers. We stopped for flowers on the way from the airport. I think we got the colors right." "It was hard to tell from Jason's phone photo," Joe said, holding out a bouquet of purple blooms. "Thank you," Zahn said, overwhelmed. "You both flew in from Perth for this?" "Wouldn't miss it," Caitlin answered. "I knew there was something between you two, but Joe didn't believe me. Now she does." "I'll believe it when I see it," grumbled Joe. "They're here but they're not married yet." The impatient receptionist called their names again, and Jason led the way into the tiny room where ceremonies were held. Zahn didn't even know the celebrant's name or what he'd say, but it didn't matter. Jason coughed and pushed a piece of notepaper into her hand. "After Caitlin's wedding, I wrote this. I tried to make it into a song, but I suck at songwriting, so it's just the words for now. I figured we could use them as wedding vows if you want." A quick glance told Zahn all she needed to know. "Sure," she said, and Jason beamed. The celebrant galloped through the preamble, so that all too soon it was time to read the vows Jason had written. Zahn cleared her throat, raising the paper in one hand while Jason held fast to the other. "Through fire and water and storm and sea, I will love and cherish you. Through it all, you will be my happily ever after, and I will be yours." Jason repeated the same words, his eyes shining as he didn't take his gaze off her. Next he produced 2 rings, her pearl and coral creation, with a simple gold band for him. She pushed the band onto his finger, repeating the celebrant's words. Then it was her turn. Jason slid the beautiful ring onto her finger, breathing the words like a blessing. Or a fervent prayer. The celebrant said something about Mr. and Mrs. and kisses. Kisses. Jason's lips caressed hers, a promise of more to come, before he pulled away. Zahn caught sight of Joe shaking her head before the celebrant demanded her attention again, this time for paperwork. All 5 of them signed the certificates and it was done. Zahn handed the bouquet back to Joe. "Thank you for bringing those. I wouldn't have thought to." "Hold it," Caitlin commanded, holding up her phone for a photo. Zahn had been aware of both girls taking pictures throughout the ceremony, but only now did she realize they held the only records of her wedding. "Can you send those to me?" Zahn asked. "Sure thing," Joe said. "Mine will probably be better. Caitlin doesn't take many photos, but I've had plenty of practice." The receptionist had gone by the time they reached the waiting room, her window shut for the day. There was a crowd waiting for the lift though, all tired-looking office workers, staring at their phones and tapping their feet. Joe and Caitlin moved in close to Jason, who now wore a pair of huge, ugly sunglasses. It took Zahn a moment to realize why. Disguising him so he wouldn't be recognized. They might be married, but their wedding was still a secret. They all bundled into a taxi to take them back to Jason's place, where both women hugged her and wished her the best. Jason invited them to dinner, but the girls declined. They had a flight to catch and work tomorrow. A whirlwind of polite goodbyes and sisterly kisses surrounded Zahn for a moment, and then she found herself alone with Jason. Her husband. On their wedding night, the thought of which turned Zahn into a bundle of nerves. "What do you want for dinner?" he asked without the slightest hint of lust in his tone. Didn't he want her? "What about sex?" Zahn blurted out, then blushed. "I don't mean for dinner. I just thought, with your reputation, you'd be ready to tear my clothes off right about now." Jason laughed ruefully. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her against him. "Xanthi, I will never rip your clothes unless you ask me to. I've wanted you from pretty much the moment I met you. I've dreamed about you so many times I can't remember a night I don't think about you." His eyes burned. "Fuck, if you say you want me now, I figure it'll take me less than 3 seconds to be balls deep inside you, and in about 5 minutes it'll be over. I've waited so fucking long." His kiss seared her lips, caressing her tongue with far more fervor than he'd shown in the registry office. She wanted more than 5 minutes, though most men didn't last that long in her experience. Jason was a man, after all. She slid her hands under his shirt, stroking the rock-hard abs she'd admired through her window every morning. Hers to caress now. "I want you," she admitted. "Fuck. And I want you, Xanthi. So fucking much. But I don't want to give you 5 minutes. Shit, I don't think 5 hours will be enough. I want you all night." Pressed against his body, melted by his kisses, Zan murmured her agreement. Jason pulled away. "That's why we need to get dinner first. Once our clothes come off, we're not going to be doing a fucking thing except make love until morning. I don't want to fuck this up." "You won't," Zan reassured him. "I'll make sure of it." She wasn't sure how, but she could work that bit out later. After dinner, if he insisted on it. 57. "Hey, there's a whole box of spring rolls here that we missed. You want one?" Jason asked. Zan didn't even glance at them as she shook her head. She just wasn't hungry anymore. Nerves wreathed like snakes in her belly, leaving no room for anything else. "I've fucked up again. I should have taken you to Sydney's finest restaurant, not ordered a bunch of stuff from the local Chinese. I'm sorry, Xanthi. I'm just so fucking euphoric about today that I wanted to keep you to myself for a bit longer." His eyes beseeched her. "Tomorrow, I'll take you out to dinner wherever you want. I'll find something with Michelin stars or something. We can have all the fancy dinners we want at home. The resort chefs are as good as any you'll find in Sydney or anywhere in Australia." Jason ran his fingers through his hair, like he always did when he got nervous. "Right. Of course. What about dessert though? We forgot to order sweets." He was as jittery as she was about tonight, Zan realized. One of them would have to take the initiative, or they'd be dithering all night. "I think it's time for the taking our clothes off bit." "You're sure?" he inquired. Zan laughed. "Now that has to be a first. I've never seen you hesitate about getting naked before, least of all around me." He grinned. Off came the pants, followed one button at a time by his shirt. He turned his back before he took off his undies, flashing his taut backside before he rotated around to show her the goods. Jason struck a priapic pose, his hips thrust toward her so he jutted out impressively. "It's all yours, Xanthi. Every inch." She'd only ever seen him during or after a swim, and she'd thought him big then. But she'd never seen him properly turned on, like he was now. The man wasn't just big. He was huge. Zan swallowed. "You might have to go easy on me with that thing," she said. "I haven't had sex for 3 years. I might be a bit out of practice." Jason nodded gravely. 3 years? Seriously? We better start practicing tonight." He eyed her dress. "I could bend you over the table right here if you want to keep that on, but I really want you to take it off. I've dreamed about you naked for a bloody long time." Zan rose and held out her arms. "Take me bed, Jason." He lifted her like the bride she was and carried her to his bedroom. He set her on her feet, pulling her in close for a kiss. Now her pretty dress got in the way. Too much fabric between his skin and hers. Zan reached for her zip but found his hands already there, undoing the back of her bodice in a steady purr. The strap slid down her arms, so she stepped away from him to allow the dress to puddle at her feet. He closed the distance between them in a moment, making her gasp as his body pressed against hers. Now the only obstacle between them was her underwear. She didn't have time to think about it though, because Jason was kissing her again. Devouring her lips, then pressing feather-light pecks along her throat to her chest. His deft hand slid her bra off so smoothly he didn't even pause in his path down her breast. She sighed as he took her nipple in his mouth, gently sucking for just a moment before he turned his attention to her other breast. Warm satin landed on her foot. Her knickers, she knew, removed by Jason's hands, which now cupped her bottom, pressing her firmly against him. All thoughts about size faded away as Zahn hooked a leg around his hip, wanting nothing more than to feel him inside her. She murmured something to that effect, but she wasn't sure if he heard her, what with him so focused on her breasts and all. Evidently he had, because the next thing she knew, Jason lifted her effortlessly, so she sat in the middle of his king-sized bed with her knees bent up and everything between on display. She didn't have time to feel self-conscious as Jason knelt between her legs, one hand lifting his length as the other stroked her thigh. Fear returned. Gods, it looked even bigger than before. More aroused than before by her. Sure, she wanted him, but how in hell was he going to get that thing inside her? Go easy on me? Zahn squeaked. Jason laughed gently. Don't worry, I'll take it slow. We have all night. He took hold of her thighs, pulling her legs toward him so she lost her balance and her head hit the pillows. Her eyes never left his. So you want to feel me inside you? Jason murmured. No longer sure of her voice, Zahn nodded. He gave her no warning, driving into her so sharply that she cried out. She clenched around him, but he withdrew as quickly as he'd entered her. Jason held up two dripping fingers. Fuck, Xanthi, you're wetter than the ocean down there. And smooth as silk. He pushed his fingers slowly back inside her. And again. He'd angled his hand perfectly to hit all the right spots, and his eyes told her he knew it. His name became a breathless moan on her lips as he stroked her all the way to Elysium and back. She found herself shaking as he leaned in to kiss her, while his fingers maintained their relentless rhythm. She was no longer Xanthi, a woman of flesh and blood. She was a nebulous cloud of sensation spun by Jason's skillful hands until she saw stars. Then she screamed, and Jason's face swam back into focus. Triumphant, grinning as he lifted his dripping fingers to his lips. You taste like the sea too. Another orgasm like the last one would blow her apart, Zahn was sure of it. She reached for him. Make love to me, Jason, she implored. I'm not done kissing you yet, he said. He moved down the bed away from her, and Zahn raised her head to see where he'd gone. He sat between her knees now, lifting her legs up higher. Yes. Oh yes, she murmured, bracing herself for his first thrust. His fingers parted her, the rough calluses on his fingertips rasping over sensitive skin until she let out a low moan. He knew exactly where to rub her just right so that she writhed in his grasp, plunging helplessly toward another rush of pleasure. Just as she peaked, he plunged into her, so that she came hard around him. It wasn't until she came up for air that she realized he was only teasing her with his tongue. Zahn stared as Jason licked his lips, then lowered his head to run his tongue over her, inside her, again. And once again, she was lost. So completely out of control. And his by all the gods his. 58. Zahn's body trembled all over, like a little lightning storm played across her skin and everything inside it. Jason's lips touched her thigh and lightning struck again, overwhelming her with sensation once more. She'd never felt so alive. So unearthly. Like a goddess made flesh for the first time. A goddess who'd married a sex god. She opened her eyes to the sound of Jason's laughter. All night, he said. We've had all night and I still can't get enough of you. All night? No one lasted all night. Not outside of fiction, anyway. Zahn raised her head to peer at the window. It can't be dawn already. It is. Our wedding night's over, Xanthi. I hope you enjoyed it. Jason flopped onto the pillow beside her with a blissful look on his face. It couldn't be over. But we didn't. He'd spent the whole night pleasuring her. With his mouth, his hands, and the rest of his body. Except for the bit that mattered. We didn't have sex, she said. Plenty of time for that. When you're ready. Zahn rolled onto her side so she could meet his eyes. You've spent the whole night on foreplay and you still don't think I'm ready? I was waiting for you to ask. I didn't want to fuck up. Zahn bit back her frustration. You've given me more orgasms in one night than I've had in the decade before last night. That's the opposite of fucking up. More like fucking awesome. Legendary, even. She climbed on top of him so she could feel his arousal between her thighs. Finish what you started, rockstar. He barely hesitated. Condoms are in the top drawer, Jason said, waving at the bedside cabinet. Zahn took a deep breath. I hate them. Nasty sticky things. I haven't slept with anyone for years and I'm clean. Are you? Jason stared at her. Of course. I haven't slept with anyone for a year, and never without a condom. Zahn found that hard to believe. It can't be that long. Penelope was here until September, wasn't she? Jason bowed his head. I never did it with her. Not last year anyway. I didn't sleep with any of the reality show contestants. The last time I had sex with a woman was Gaia. A year ago. And she made you swear off sex? For a week or so, yeah? Fuck, I had nightmares about her screaming for me to spank her harder when it stung my hands as it was. Jason shuddered. But when she left, you got out of that helicopter and it was like dawn breaking through the clouds. You let me hug you and it was like home. Zahn swallowed. He'd been in love with her that long and she hadn't even noticed? But a year? How did a rock star like you manage to keep your dick in your pants for a whole year? You were the one telling me to wear pants. She laughed. She might have told him to, but he'd rarely listened. So what with being a good boy so long and all, the first time we do this, I'll be lucky to last 5 minutes. Zahn ground her hips against him, making him groan. Then I'll ask you for an encore later, she said. Honey-colored eyes stared at her, filled with longing. You really mean it? She was aching for it. Give me my 5 minutes, rockstar. He shifted and they rolled together until he was on top. At least he hadn't picked doggy style, she thought as she relaxed beneath him like a proper missionary, ready to let him do all the work. Jason shook his head, lifting her legs up so high, her toes pointed toward the ceiling. They might only be 5 minutes, but they'll be 5 fucking awesome minutes, I promise. He knelt so close to her that she could feel his knees behind her bottom. Before Zahn could protest that she'd never heard of a sex position like this, she felt the heat of his tip parting her folds. Jason eased inside her, inching his way over skin so sensitized it sang at his touch. She closed her eyes in bliss. This was what she'd craved, longed for, dreamed about. Hot and hard and filling her so perfectly, he felt like a part of her. But Jason had stopped moving. Are you all right, Xanthi? Yes, she said, clenching lightly around him just to see if she could. Oh, that felt incredible. Keep going. He chuckled. Oh, I'm all in. Balls deep in my wife. You know what it feels like when you do that? Like coming home to the heat of a roaring fire, gliding through silk, and that little clench thing you did there? That's a fucking welcome home hug right there. It even makes my toes curl. Home. He was right. Comfortable and yet toe-curlingly incredible, all at the same time. Xanthi? Now she had him inside her, she didn't want to think about anything else. What if I want more than 5 minutes? She held her breath as he slid out of her just as tortuously as he'd glided in. No, almost out before he resumed his slow thrust into her depths. Take as long as you like, she breathed. I want forever, Xanthi. Forever with you. Then take it. I'm yours and you're mine. Forever. When his triumphant shout harmonized with hers, a considerable amount of time later, sunlight streamed through the window, hallowing them both as it bathed their bodies in light. Is this what happily ever after feels like? Jason murmured, his honey eyes sweet with love. Zahn laughed. Yes. And it's better than anything I ever read in a book, because it's ours. 59. Zahn shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot in her new shoes, wishing she'd worn a different pair. Her body still ached from their lovemaking marathon, even after a stint in the spa. Or maybe it was the multiple encores that were responsible. Somewhere in her head, she'd made a mental note that slow and steady in a position Jason had called the anvil made for unbelievable sex. Part of her ache was a desire for more, she knew, though they'd have to wait until they reached the island for that. Then, in the privacy of his villa or her unit, or maybe even the honeymoon suite, she'd surrender and let him worship her body all over again. At least she wouldn't be returning to Sydney for a while. She'd taken the time to call the Sydney hotel and tell them she wouldn't take the job. No, not even if they increased the salary. When they'd asked her why, she'd said it was because she loved island life too much to move to the city. Jason finished reading the recording company's prepared statement, and invited questions from the assembled crowd of reporters at the airport media conference. Zahn should have predicted the first one, but it took them both by surprise. "Where's your bride?" Jason hesitated for a moment, then repeated what he'd said in the statement about his plans to tour Australia. His hand shook slightly as he pointed to another reporter for the second question. "Everyone knows you got married at a secret ceremony on Romance Island Resort a few weeks ago, and this is the first time you've been seen in public since then. But the one thing no one seems to know, who is the bride?" Jason fixed a smile on his face and launched into a paean of praise for the resort. Not once did he mention a wedding, or Caitlin, or his own bride. He finished with, "Romance Island Resort is the most romantic honeymoon destination you can imagine." He'd promised to show her when she said she'd prefer to return to the island instead of staying another week in Sydney. Zahn did her best to hide her smile, though she didn't think anyone was looking at her. All their attention was fixed on Jason, who continued to ask for questions he didn't actually answer. The reporters began to complain about Jason's stupidity, which Zahn thought was particularly unfair. This was a press conference called to publicize the news of his comeback tour, not his personal life. "When will we get the wedding photos so we can publish them?" an irate reporter demanded, digging her long nails into her phone case as she strove to record his response. Probably never, if Zahn had any say about it. And she did, seeing as she was in them. She'd had enough anyway. She stepped up to the microphone beside Jason. "As always, Romance Island Resort respects the privacy of its guests, and I'm sure Mr. and Mrs. Felix are grateful for your discretion. Perhaps when they are ready, they will release photos to the press, but I understand Mr. Felix is eager to return to the island, to continue their honeymoon. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank him for sharing his momentous music news, and wish him every happiness with his new wife." And with that, she called an end to the press conference. Now the whispers sounded like her name, as those who didn't know her were quickly filled in by those who did. Not a single one of them tried to ask her about his wife though. None of them seemed to realize the truth, that Jason's bride stood before them, and they hadn't asked her a single question or tried to snap her photograph. So nothing had changed really. They all still worshipped Jason the rock god while she was no one. And not important enough for Jason to introduce to them as his wife either, Zahn thought sadly, grabbing her carry-on case and wheeling it behind her. Jason hurried to catch up. "Thanks," he panted. "I thought they'd want to know more about the tour." "Not Caitlin." "Why didn't you distract them by telling them about me then?" Zahn asked. "I wouldn't throw you to the wolves like that. They'd eat you alive," Jason hissed, glancing back. "I can hold my own against a press crew." "I did just fine back there," Zahn reminded him. "Why didn't you tell them then?" That brought her up short. "Because, well, you didn't. I figured you didn't want them to know. I mean, what sort of rock star marries a hotel manager? It's not the sort of thing people write romance books about." "Fuck the books," he growled. "This is real. I love you and I don't care what they think. I think you're fucking awesome." Zahn wet her lips. "Tell them then. Tell the world." Jason glanced back. "You want me to spill my feelings to those vultures?" "No," Zahn said patiently. "Just tell them I'm your wife. We're about to hop on a plane to Broome, where we'll hide out at the island for as long as our honeymoon lasts. By the time it's over, they'll have run out of stories to spin about us, and moved on to the next celebrity crisis. Someone's boobs or bottom or baby. He stared at her for a long moment. I'm not going to tell them anything. A picture tells 1,000 words, right? He grabbed her hand, the one with the ring. Stick your hand on my shoulder here. Now hold on and look like you're enjoying it. He let out a piercing whistle, so every eye in the airport turned to him. Jason took a deep breath, wrapped his arms around her, dipped her low, and kissed her. Camera flashes strobed, people clapped, and someone let out a wolf whistle louder than the noise Jason had made, but Zahn didn't care. She didn't have to pretend to enjoy anything. Jason's kisses were a promise of the bedtime bliss that would come later. Eventually, he let her up, still not letting go of her. Do you think we made that clear enough? He asked. I think so, Zahn said softly. Can we go catch that plane now? Yeah. It's time to take my wife home. A loud voice from behind shouted, Where are you going, Mr. Felix? Jason stopped. Wait. I'll answer this one. He turned to face the crowd, pulling her so she could see them all too. We're going home. To the home of romance, Romance Island Resort, he roared. Zahn waited until they'd gone through the boarding gate before she said, You might be a rock star, but you're still crazy, Jason Felix. Yeah, but you like it. You're a bit crazy too. I mean, you married me. Yeah, she sighed. Speaking of crazy stuff, want to join the Mile High Club with your husband on the way home? He asked eagerly. Jason. This has been The Rockstar's Wedding. Book 6 in the Romance Island Resort series. Written by Demelza Carlton. Autonarrated by AI Chris from Google.